Now that I'm a dad, I'm already starting to think about some of the things I want to teach my kid as she grows up. And one lesson I really want to teach my daughter as she gets older is to find someone that loves you and wants to be with you the way that Brandon Ayuk does with the Washington Commanders. It is good to be back, a new man, a father. Thank you, all of you, for your good wishes, whether it's in these comments, on Twitter, Patreon, in the Discord, wherever it is. You guys, this community is so special. I'm so thankful. And now that I have, with my wife, kind of figured some things out a little bit of a routine, I'm excited to get back in the chair and keep things rolling with this wonderful deep dive series. And welcome to the reveal of the number 23 team in my preseason power rankings. Is today we're going to take a deep dive into the Washington Commanders. This team, I think, got a little bit of a reality check last year after really sending it, bringing in some veterans, having made the NFC Championship the year before. Maybe not the best internal look at the mirror, assuming they would just get back. And it was a rough year, obviously. Ended up picking inside the top 10. And now they kind of hit a bit of a reset button. Not a full rebuild, but a nice little reset button. And they have a chance, I think, to be a little bit of a post-hype sleeper now as we head into the 2026 season. This team still has a lot of room to grow, and we'll talk about all of those areas for sure. But this team has a lot to like as well. So let's go ahead and get started. As we do, if you enjoy this series, please do hit that like button down below. A little football emote will show up as well, which is fun. But more importantly, it really will go a long way towards supporting this series and my channel. Of course, make sure you're subscribed as well if you enjoy the deep dives. That will help make sure you don't miss any of these as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. And without further ado, let's begin. As always, we go through every aspect of the team, from the roster to the coaching staff. And at the beginning of every segment, we take a look at their offseason changes and ask the question, did they get better, worse, or stay the same? And the Washington Commanders here are shuffling the deck, not at head coach, but with both coordinators. This is a big year for Dan Quinn in many ways, and probably the biggest of which is for a CEO-style head coach. It is all about picking the right coordinators to run both sides of the ball there. And they say goodbye to both Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt and bring in David Blough for the offensive coordinator spot, or actually promote David Blough, rather. He has been in-house here. And then Daronte Jones, a very fascinating hire I'm excited to break down here. And then also noteworthy is a change in offensive line coach. They say goodbye to Bobby Johnson, who actually did a very good job here, and then promote Darnell Stapleton. Hard to say, like, how big of a hand in Washington's offensive line. I would say overachieving over the last 2 years. How big of a hand Darnell Stapleton had in that, as he was an assistant offensive line coach. They obviously like what they see there, and I'll give them the benefit of kind of the internal promotion there to say that it's not downgraded with the offensive line coach, but definitely noteworthy that they did make a change at offensive line coach as well. As far as that question, did they get better, worse, or stay the same? Commanders fans aren't going to like this, but I do think Cliff Kingsbury is at least a moderate loss. It's kind of the number one rule of being a fan of a team is you don't like your play caller. And we've seen Commanders fans start to lose a little patience with Cliff Kingsbury, which is just gonna par for the course for pretty much any NFL fan. I do think Cliff Kingsbury is a good play caller, a very good schemer, and is a loss in that sense. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on David Blough to fill those shoes. So at least in terms of proven commodities, I do think the offensive coaching is at least slightly downgraded for now. To be determined, though, on what David Blough will bring to the table, stepping up into that role. But I am very excited about them being able to bring in Daronte Jones. We're going to get into him a lot here in this coaches segment, but I do look at that as a very solid addition. I think he brings a lot more to the table than what they were getting with Joe Witt. So I'm excited there, and I think that probably evens out to at least call it neutral for now, / to be determined. There's a lot of upside with this coaching staff, as we're about to talk about, for this to potentially be not just upgraded, but massively upgraded. But let's delve into this coaching staff further here. So you obviously start at the top with Dan Quinn, who was hired 2 years ago as a defensive-minded coach, doing some incredible things with that Dallas Cowboys defense inside this division. But since he arrived here, he's made it very clear, like, he wants to be that sort of Dan Campbell, John Harbaugh, CEO style coach. And that comes with its pros and cons, and a lot of the cons get pushed to the forefront there, where you're in many ways only as good as your coordinators. As we've already kind of started to discuss, they've already shuffled the deck. I do think with Dan Quinn kind of pushing that button here after a down season, I do look at that as the equivalent of him kind of playing his hand there. This has to work. I do think Dan Quinn is on the hot seat after a really disappointing second season. If these changes at coordinator do not work out, you're not getting the defensive kind of, hands on the wheel approach from Dan Quinn as the defensive mind here. You do start to have to beg the question of, like, what is it really that Dan Quinn brings to the table here? And especially when there was some tension there between Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury, it was very much a differing in philosophy that led to them parting ways with Cliff Kingsbury and then internally promoting David Blough here. So the way that kind of played out, the way that he changed coordinators on both sides of the ball, the way that he's kind of passing his defense off in many ways to a Daronte Jones, very much to me says Dan Quinn is on the hot seat and just might be the hottest of seats this year. And I want to hear from Commanders fans as well. Do you agree? Should Dan Quinn be on the hot seat here? Now, that's not to say Dan Quinn doesn't bring anything to the table. I do like Dan Quinn, and I can see why players would love to play for Dan Quinn. He does have a lot of charisma and is someone that I think players really do relate to. And we did see in that first year, they hit all the right buttons. The culture here in Washington was flipped overnight, and Dan Quinn deserves credit for that. The Commanders, despite coming off a losing season, do have respectable rankings for me in that overall coach and culture grade, which is a little bit of that benefit of the doubt slider. Does this team have a good locker room culture? Do they understand how to win? They rank 16th to 21st there under Dan Quinn and this staff, which is not amazing, obviously, coming off the year that they just did, but very respectable and, so to speak, higher than the 23rd overall power ranking, if you will, as well. So I do think in terms of putting together the locker room, running a practice, being someone that can rally the team and teach a locker room how to win, I do think Dan Quinn, as a CEO, if he gets his coordinators right, that can be just fine as your head coach. And I have him as my 24th head coach in the league right now, but again, very much on the hot seat. It is also at least worth mentioning that Dan Quinn does have a defensive background. He did an excellent job with Dallas as their defensive coordinator, so much so that it got him a second run at being a head coach here. And I don't think he's just entirely hands-off with the defense in a good way. He is going to empower a Daronte Jones, as he's done with a Joe Witt. He's going to let them call the plays and run the defense in many ways through that defensive coordinator's eyes. But I do think he's primarily on that side of the ball at practice. He's going to be in those meeting rooms in terms of putting together the kind of macro philosophy of the defense, blitz rate, what sort of coverages do we want to focus on, maybe some of those adjustments. He is there as a defensive mind. He does deserve credit for that. And that is also reflected in the Commanders' defensive coaching rankings, which is some ways split between how I view Dan Quinn and how I view Daronte Jones that I'm about to talk about here. But to get that ranking out of the way here, they get very respectable grades for their defensive coaching here. 10th to 17th for pass defense coaching, right in that ballpark for run defense coaching, ranking 11th to 18th, B grades across the board there. So I do think as far as defensive coaching here, I'm very optimistic that they're in good hands between Dan Quinn and then, yes, Daronte Jones here coming in from Minnesota. And I just want to start with Daronte Jones' resume for a second, because this feels like it's been a long time coming for Daronte Jones to become a defensive coordinator. This man's resume at 47 years old is really impressive. He had about 15 years of coaching experience at the college level at a bunch of different stops, but you begin his NFL coaching ascension in Miami under Vance Joseph, a big name guy to kind of start things off there in his first NFL coaching gig. Then Matt Burke comes in, a young Matt Burke at the time. Burke doing an excellent job with the Texans, is becoming a head coach candidate in his own right. But then he gets introduced to the Marvin Lewis, Mike Zimmer coaching tree. He goes to Cincinnati in 2018 under Marvin Lewis, and then kind of reunited with that coaching tree, joining Mike Zimmer in 2020. Lewis and Zimmer are very tightly knit as a coaching tree. In between those years, he stayed in Cincinnati under Lou Anarumo, who's another excellent defensive mind. But then the big one, the prominent one, and the reason Daronte Jones gets this job is Brian Flores the last 3 years. And I've had a lot of fun conversations living in Minnesota with just Vikings fans around here, really learning like, okay, who's that next guy? Because Brian Flores has been a head coach candidate for about 3 years now. And because of his lawsuit, it's been kind of wishy-washy on whether or not he was going to get that head coaching job. But the Vikings kind of had to be at the ready in any given moment if Brian Flores was going to get a head coaching job. And they have really been grooming Daronte Jones to be that guy for them. Learning, like, just study Brian Flores, understand what he does, get ready to implement that system that has worked, I think, as good as any defensive coaching has elevated a defensive roster over the last 3 years combined. It's not even close, I think, what Brian Flores has done with Daronte Jones as his kind of left-hand man, as his apprentice. There, again, the resume is incredible. He's ready for this. He's been groomed for this by, I mean, not just Brian Flores, but like getting to be with Kevin O'Connell, who's highly respected just as a leader and a head coach. There's so much to like about this hire, all the way down to the fact that the Commanders even got Brian Flores in the building for a defensive coordinator hire. It was kind of a phony interview because, like, the Vikings were always going to give Brian Flores however much money he needed to stay in Minnesota as long as it was for a defensive coordinator position. But I can guarantee that Dan Quinn and the Commanders were picking Flores' mind about Daronte Jones and if this was going to be a good hire. And I can only assume that Brian Flores said good things about Daronte Jones, which leads to the Commanders hiring him. So the resume is impressive. But what's even more impressive than the resume is what this scheme has looked like in Minnesota. And this comes with the caveat of Brian Flores has been calling the shots there. All of the crazy, innovative, impressive things that Minnesota has done, the credit for that goes to Brian Flores before Daronte Jones. Of course, it's impossible to know some of these things we're going to talk about, some of these fun schematic wrinkles. It's impossible to know if any of those ideas were Daronte Jones's ideas. But what I'm getting at here is this comes with the caveat that Daronte Jones is going to have to prove that he wasn't just hanging out with Brian Flores and mooching off of that. Like, he can come in, implement a very unique system, or at least his version of whatever defense, he wants to run here, and do things his own way. So he still has a lot to prove. He's never really called the shots like this. This is his first gig in charge of a defense. But with that said, I do want to just talk about what that Viking scheme has looked like so Commanders can get an idea of some of the overall just like concepts and philosophies that you can probably expect here with this defense. So Flores has run the most unique defense in the NFL over the last 3 years. And what's really impressive to me is that that defense has evolved in all 3 years of Brian Flores being there. And you can really point to like some specific things that they were doing in each of those years and say like, wow, that was really thoughtful and innovative and not just creative. Like, Jonathan Gannon got creative in Arizona. It didn't always work. For the most part, Brian Flores has been creative, and it's led to results as a top 10 defense in Minnesota with a probably bottom 10 to 15 defensive roster in Minnesota. But the first year, it was that sort of like min-maxed approach to the defense where They blitzed a ton, and blitzing is a very common theme with Brian Flores and his defense. But again, doing it in different ways every year. But in 2023, that first year, they basically would walk everybody up to the line of scrimmage, and they led the league in zero blitz percentage, and they led the league in 3-man rush percentage. So they walked everybody up to the line, those amoeba fronts, but kept you guessing as far as, were 6 guys coming? Or were you actually going to drop into an 8-man protection? You thought you had to get the ball out quickly, and then you got all these guys in coverage ready to rally and tackle. So that worked, but that was probably not always going to be sustainable. Teams even started to figure out a little bit at the end of the season. 2024, I would say they became a little bit more traditional, leaned more on just your classic 5-man rushes, but you can still really get into all the creative loops and disguised rushers and a lot of that same idea of walking everybody up to the line of scrimmage and not knowing where guys are coming. You get some of those unblocked rushers, those phantom pressures where the line slides in the wrong direction. And then you go to 2025, and Brian Flores really started to run a lot of cover 4 blitzes, which are not common. The vast majority of zone blitzes in the NFL are going to be out of cover 3 and maybe cover 2. But Brian Flores really dove deep into the film room and came up with some cover 4 match zone style blitzes out of a 2-shell structure that could really be effective. And then some of the rest of the league started to run some more of that. Steve Spagnuolo started to pick up on that, chicken or the egg there. I don't know who originally maybe leaned into that concept first, but Brian Flores did run a decent amount of cover 4 blitzes last year, which was really effective. So just getting really, into different looks and multiple in terms of what sort of blitzes they're running, what sort of coverages they're running. That's been the name of the game for this Vikings defensive staff. And then there's also the conversation that needs to be had about how they've utilized their fronts. A lot of the time in Minnesota here with Flores and Jones, they've run that kind of 5-1 penny front base defense with actually a 3 safety base defense, with the idea of a Josh Metellus, for example, to be kind of half linebacker, half slot corner, where you're coming out with 5-man at the line, 1 linebacker, and the Metellus is kind of roaming as a bit of a linebacker. So that sort of look acts partly as a base 3-4 defense with Metellus as the extra linebacker there, and it also just kind of operates as a base nickel defense. That's absolutely something they've done in Minnesota. So when we get to the secondary and the conversations about this defense, it's something to keep in mind, though they've loaded up a linebacker here. I don't know how much of running 1 linebacker defenses that we're going to see here in Washington, but it's something to keep an eye on that they have done here. And you can always take a Leo Chanel or something and walk him up as the kind of Andrew Van Ginkel in those types of looks too. So there's definitely potential to see some of that stuff there. To kind of wrap this defensive scheme conversation up, I do want to show some of the numbers on the Vikings defense last year. Again, those coverage rates changed so much over the years. It's hard to know exactly what they're going to run here, but it is at least useful to look at what the Vikings did last year with Daronte Jones there. They led the league in 0 blitzes again this year. And then they actually ran a ton of cover 2, and that was a lot of those blitzes. They were dead last in cover 3, and that, I think, right there really shows you that they got away from your more traditional cover 3 fire zone looks. Cover 4, they ran 15% of the time, which was 22nd. But more just kind of blitzing out of those 2-shell defenses was, I would say, the schematic wrinkle that they brought to the table last year in Minnesota. And also very notable is this team almost never ran man coverage. They only ran man coverage other than 0 blitzes. They only ran man coverage just over 10% of the time. And that is something I would expect to continue here given the state of the secondary. They actually 0 blitzed more than they ran cover 1 and cover 2 man combined. Also notable here is their base defense rate. They did actually run a base 3-4 defense, second most in the league, 49.6%. So they were not afraid to load up the box, match heavy personnel, and it it helps when you're in a division with the Packers, Lions, and Vikings that love to come out in some of those heavy packages. But they ran base defense almost double the league average. So something certainly to keep in mind there. And then again, not a surprise, but they were number 1 in the NFL in blitz rate. If you're getting lost in some of this scheme conversation, a nice kind of cherry on top to just understand generally what to expect here is blitz, blitz, blitz in every sort of different shape, size, variety you can think of. They've done it in Minnesota. And when the Commanders defense did have a lot of success at the end of the 2024 season, at least relative success for a really talentless defense, it was creative blitzing, sending those linebackers, getting after it in that sense that really helped things move along. And Dan Quinn is going to be able to bring some to the table in that sense as well. Now, I want to thank the sponsor for today's video, and that is the #1 ticketing app out there, SeatGeek. Whether you're going to catch a baseball game, SeatGeek is the official partner of the MLB. Maybe you're checking out a World Cup match or going to a concert or loading up as the NFL season approaches here. SeatGeek has got you covered. If you understand the color coding system of this deep dive series, green means bad, red means good, well, congratulations. You understand how to use the SeatGeek app that makes it so easy to browse seats. They'll give you images of exactly what your seats are actually going to look like if you've never been to the stadium. But in their stadium map, you look for the green dots. They will guarantee you get the best bang for your buck, not just on the SeatGeek app compared to their other offerings, but market competitive prices as well. I'm always looking at other options for tickets, find myself right back at SeatGeek. Their app is easy to use. You get the tickets right there in your ticketing app. You don't have to jump through email chains or worry, about getting your tickets to load as you approach the gate. They make everything so seamless. They've been an excellent partner for this channel for years as well. And now if you use code TFG10, you will save up to $20 on your next purchase as well. That's code TFG10 at checkout. Have so much fun wherever it is you are headed. And let's get back to the deep dive. Now, we still have to talk about the offensive coaching here. And this is a pretty big conversation as well, actually, because David Blough to me is a huge wild card for this team this year. Almost entirely inexperienced as a coach. He's been coaching for a couple years here in Washington, working underneath Cliff Kingsbury. He was a backup quarterback just a couple years ago and also had to stop working under Cliff Kingsbury as a player as well. So they didn't entirely hate a lot of the stuff that they've done under Cliff Kingsbury, clearly. They stick in-house with David Blough, whose most prominent coaching experience is in this system. Now, there's been a lot of talk about wanting to be more of a wide zone, kind of Shanahan-style offense here as well. So there's not necessarily a lot of coaching resume that would say David Blough knows how to run that stuff necessarily. It's just been there's more talk about that's the direction they want to go and needs to be noted here. But kind of the expectation here is this is going to be a blend of that sort of air raid, even like run and shoot mentality under Cliff Kingsbury that leans on a lot of those, your classic mesh concept, quick bubble screens, read option, a little pistol in there. I think it's going to still be a blend of that, some of the stuff that's really worked under Cliff Kingsbury and worked for Jaden Daniels, especially in that rookie season. And then putting a little more on Jaden's plate in terms of some of the more like modern pro style Kyle Shanahan concepts. I feel like pro style could mean anything to depending who you ask. I feel like modern pro style is a Shanahan offense. I don't know how it couldn't be because 2/3 of the league runs it, if not more. So there's been a lot of talk about, getting under center or maybe from the pistol, play action, snap that head around, marry the run and pass a little bit more than they've done under Cliff Kingsbury, whose run game can be diverse, but a little bit more north and south, inside zone, counter, QB read type of stuff. So I do think marrying those two schemes with a David Blough, who's kind of a blank slate, I actually really like that as a concept. I can absolutely see how the Commanders got there, where they're like, Cliff's kind of set in his ways. He doesn't really have the, it's like when you're so far gone in one direction as Cliff Kingsbury is with the air raid stuff, it's kind of hard to reel him in and ask him to do other stuff that he's not very comfortable with, even if he might be the best air raid style, run and shoot style play caller available in the country. But I think Blough's a little bit more of a blank canvas who can do a lot of that stuff, but also maybe expand a little bit into those more like Shanahan style concepts. So I can absolutely see how the Commanders got there and why you could get excited about the potential of this. I mean, David Blough absolutely fits the kind of archetype model for what a lot of these teams are going for. The young, ascending play caller. A lot of times these are like recent former backup quarterbacks, and many of these guys have had success working around the league. So there's a ton of potential here with David Blough. Even though if you talk about what he has proven, how confident can you be that he's going to be good at this, like calling plays, pushing the right buttons, installing the offense, especially theoretically implementing a stuff that he hasn't necessarily done a ton of. That's a lot to ask of him. So I can't rank David Blough and the offensive coaching here very high. They come in that bottom tier, a C grade in that sort of unproven commodities cluster of young offensive minds and play callers. But there's totally a world where he's awesome. I would not be surprised. Again, he's in that archetype of guys that have just kind of surprised. And if that happens, if he's great as an offensive coach, that's going to go a long way towards this team having success this season. I really do believe that. You've got a lot of questions about what the offensive coaching is going to look like. If you hit green lights with those question marks and you've found this perfect middle ground and this kind of creative blend of multiple different schemes here, yeah, that can really be exciting and work here. So both Daronte Jones and David Blough to me are, yes, unproven, but extremely exciting hires that could really be the kind of drivers behind the Commanders maybe being a bit of a surprise team this year, because right now there's not a ton of momentum for this team coming out of the 2025 season. But there's your coaching staff. A lot to talk about there. It's a little bit all over the place, but a fun conversation nonetheless. And this is definitely a staff that I'm very excited to watch and monitor just how these guys do, but schematically speaking as well. The football nerd in me gets pretty excited about, on both sides of the ball, some of the different things that Blough and Jones are going to be able to bring to the table here. And let's now dive into this Commanders roster. We're going to start at quarterback, looking at their offseason changes here. They are upgraded because Jayden Daniels missed a lot of time for injuries last year. If you missed more than half the year for injuries, I will put you in here as a addition. So should be full go with his return here in just the biggest of third years for Jayden Daniels. And then they do draft Ethan Kaliakmanis, a name that, as a Gophers fan, I could not believe seeing come across the screen in the 7th round of the draft, but he did go to Rutgers and turn things around a little bit. So they draft the strong-armed Ethan Kaliakmanis there in the 7th round as a backup. But obviously, Jayden Daniels making this upgraded at quarterback compared to the 2025 Commanders. But that's not to say there isn't a lot of pressure on Jayden Daniels, not to save his job or prove that he's the franchise quarterback or anything like that, but to get back to anything close to what we saw in his rookie season, because he raised the bar so high, almost unreasonably high. I think played the best level of rookie quarterbacking that I can remember, especially by the end of the year. The entire season was super impressive, but him heading into the playoffs and then through the playoffs, he was playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And it reached a point where it was very hard to sit there and actually find weaknesses in his game. And to say that about a rookie, that just doesn't really happen, right? So he comes in next year with just incredible expectations to kind of prove that he can be one of these top 5 elite, tier 1 quarterbacks. And the year just went in the complete opposite direction. I think what we really saw was some of the concerns on Jaden Daniels' rookie profile, his scouting profile coming out of college, started to surface a little bit more. Not to like a full degree, but the play on the field was not quite as good. It just was, everything kind of got turned down a little bit. It felt like he wasn't always seeing the kind of intermediate middle of the field quite as well. The accuracy was a little bit more spotty than it was in his rookie season. Not bad, but just a couple more misses. The rate just got turned up a little bit more. A couple more like interceptable, turnover-worthy mistakes showed up. The big plays weren't there quite as much. The like monster scrambles weren't always there. And then honestly, like I really hate to go there, but it's always going to creep into the back of your mind with Jaden Daniels, who he just is a more slender quarterback. From a like frame perspective, he doesn't look like most NFL quarterbacks. There was always going to be a little bit of a concern with him being able to withstand hits against massive NFL bodies. And he did get hurt last year, quite bad. A shoulder injury ended his season short. Felt like he was just kind of banged up from start to finish in general. And that's all I'm going to say. Like, I really hope it's just a fluke. I've said in the past that like frame matters, but it's not everything. Like your play style and how you avoid hits is equally important, if not more important than just how big you are. Like, dude, Cam Newton and Andrew Luck were some of the more like injury prone quarterbacks because they thought they were Superman and just took too many hits. I do think Jaden Daniels has gotten a lot better at sliding, which was a big question with him coming out, but just him being able to not get hurt now is on the radar. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not calling him injury prone. I'm not expecting him to get hurt, but that was a part of his college profile was like, yeah, he's a little bit slender, and yeah, he took a lot of hits in college. Like, is he going to get hurt? And unfortunately, that surfaced on top of some of the other question marks in terms of accuracy, processing, decision-making, all that stuff. It all just kind of came back to earth with Jaden Daniels last year. Now, I don't think he was bad. I want to be clear about that. I still think he played somewhere around like top 20 quarterbacking in the 7 games we watched. He had that Chargers game that was like, okay, Jaden's still in there. Like he had an incredible game there in that Chargers game. I went back and watched it. It was just as good as I remember it live. But it was really, that was about it, right? Like there was maybe some glimpses of it in different moments scattered throughout the season. But Jaden Daniels in his rookie year, when he headed into the playoffs and through the playoffs, it was the consistency that really blew me away with him. And the fact that defenses just could not come up with any sort of answer for him. His cerebral ability as a passer in that rookie season is what got me the most excited about Jaden Daniels. Because if you played two shell against him and try to prevent those slot fades and those, deep shots that he can hit, he'll sit in the pocket and pick you apart and take what's there. His pocket presence and ability to beat you with his legs and his, how often do I talk about not just being athletic, but knowing when and how to use your feet and how to sense pressure and navigate pressure and extend plays when it's necessary, but avoiding panicking and bailing out of clean pockets. It was just excellent pocket presence from Jaden Daniels in that rookie season. And I still saw that in year 2, by the way. But if teams gave Jaden opportunities, again, in that rookie season, he would push the ball deep to a Terry McLaurin. He can drive the ball downfield with touch and accuracy and beat you to all 3 levels. He even was attacking the intermediate part of the field much better than I expected him to, because that was a severe weakness in his college profile at LSU. So it was all there for Jaden Daniels. I really think the level of quarterbacking that we got to see from him for about a 2-month stretch, it mirrored in many ways like the level of quarterbacking of like Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, where when those guys are on, it's just like, he's got all the answers to the test, and how do we beat this guy? And I do think Jaden was just so locked in as well. I don't spend a ton of time talking about like the kind of subjective side of quarterbacking, which is like confidence and clutch and being cool, calm, and composed. I think that can be a little dangerous at times, and sometimes you say that because you don't always have other things to praise a quarterback for, if that makes sense. And with Jaden, it was like the composure and the clutch, and like no moment was too big for him. it felt more tangible with him in that rookie season, that he just had that it factor, and the game seemed to be moving in slow motion. And like, this is all what you want back from Jayden Daniels. Obviously, that's the dream for this Commanders season, is you get that guy back. If that happens, you're dealing with a level of quarterback play where, like we saw in 2024, you're allowed to have some deficiencies on the team. Your defense can be a little bit worse. You can have pretty much nobody else to throw the football to other than Terry McLaurin. That's the point of having an elite quarterback, is the surroundings don't need to be perfect. The dream is to get that level of quarterback back from Jayden Daniels. And I think that's possible. And that's why he gets the wild card icon for me, in the sense that, like, if that happens, this team is going to shatter the 23rd ranking that we have on them heading into the year. Now, there's the downside of things, right? I actually have the yellow arrow on Jayden Daniels, because I do think we saw a quarterback that was still good, but not as good as I currently have Jayden ranked heading into the year as the 9th overall quarterback. Still giving him a lot of benefit from that rookie season, because like I said last year, if you're evaluating the tape, how good was Jayden last year? Still a good player, but probably more QB 18-ish. Still a good player. You're not in panic mode. Still a young player that maybe could get better from that point, especially as things hopefully improve around Jayden Daniels here. But that is much more of that kind of level of quarterback play where you need the surrounding infrastructure to be certainly better than some of the parts of this team that we'll talk about as we go through this deep dive here. But it is a big year for Jayden Daniels. It's not going to determine whether he's the franchise quarterback or not, but it's a big year for us to see that elite version of him is still in there, and that this isn't more of a CJ Stroud situation. There's a lot of parallels to CJ Stroud's trajectory and Jayden Daniels. Stroud was a very similar conversation heading into last season, and unfortunately, things went in the other direction. We've got a lot of questions about CJ Stroud right now. This is a small sample size sport, and sometimes it is hard to just get back to that level and assume it's going to come back. So for all those reasons, yeah, Jayden Daniels is heading into a huge year and is the biggest wild card of wild cards for this team, especially because of the upside he can bring to the table. The backup room is the backup room. Marcus Mariota has done his thing here. Very Jayden Daniels-esque in terms of like the areas of the field that he's good at attacking, the way he can use his legs. He's a natural backup here. It's a good thing they brought him back, and he's had to play a lot of ball here at this point, and he's one of the better backups in the league. So if Jayden's going to miss a week or two, and you're trying to have a playoff competitive season, Marcus Mariota can keep your ship from sinking in that sense. And then, Ethan Kaliakmanis, I don't have a ton of thoughts on him. I know, I'm familiar with him as a Gophers fan, rigid, tall, strong-armed quarterback that did, start to hit some green lights with some of the processing and decision-making at Rutgers. But there is your quarterback room, where, again, they rank 9th overall. I have them 14th for passing, and then it kind of goes without saying, but the run game impact is also massive for Jayden Daniels, where they rank inside the top 3 for that run game kind of elevator grade. Even if they don't run him a ton, he is extremely efficient when he does run as a read option quarterback. But they do it enough that you can visibly see how he's able to hold those backside defenders on inside zone, even outside zone. Like, it really does change the math with how incredible he is as a rushing threat. Certainly just an added asset that he brings to this Commanders team outside of the drop back passing game. But with that, let's go to the backfield here. Take a look at their offseason changes at running back. They say goodbye to Chris Rodriguez, who actually had a pretty good, efficient year last year. Very quietly had over 500 rushing yards despite only playing 24% of their snaps. But they do bring in Rachaad White for, I'm not the biggest Rachaad White fan, but they paid him almost nothing to come here. And I think reunite with Jayden Daniels was behind that, going back to their Arizona State days. And then they also draft Katron Allen out of Penn State in the 6th round there. So I do say slightly upgraded at running back, despite Chris Rodriguez playing well last year. But overall, this isn't the highest ranking running back room. I would say in a league full of good running backs, this is a running back room that is going to allow them to do what they want to do and does have some potential to certainly finish the year ranked higher than this. Not really any concerns here, but it's not a group that I would necessarily rank towards the top of the league, at least right now. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, I would expect, is going to be the lead back here in what is still probably going to be some bit of a committee. But I do think Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt showed enough in his rookie season to kind of be the lead back. I don't know what I would say necessarily say workhorse to that extent, but lead back in terms of like the plan is clearly for him to lead the team in carries. And I think he has a lot of potential to just be a really nice, good starting running back. Maybe a star. I don't know about superstar. Like if you want to really push like top 7 or 8 rankings, like that was a pretty high, pretty lofty goal for Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. But could he finish the year as the 15th best running back in the NFL and you feel really good about him? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is extremely traitsy. There's not really any traits that hold this guy back. Like, he's got long speed. I love his ability to kind of change gears and go from short strider, where he can make guys miss in short areas, run between the tackles, and then really open up that gate, change gears, and be more of a long striding breakaway athlete. Kind of reminds me actually a little bit of Joe Mixon in the way that his legs kind of operate. He's not quite as big as Joe Mixon. So in turn, you're not getting quite as much of a power profile from Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, but he, with that speed to power ability, he can run through arm tackles and bully guys up for tough yards. I think the vision is acceptable, but questionable at times. And some fumbling stuff popped up with him, which slowed him down in his rookie season. Kind of, I don't know necessarily saying get put in the doghouse, but not always the trusted back there. Chris Rodriguez got his fair share of carries last year. Overall, there's really a lot to like with him. I think he's probably going to have a good season in a pretty healthy offensive infrastructure. He came close to 1,000 yards last year. That was on 175 carries. So I would say that probably comes up to 225 carries if he stays healthy, and probably surpasses about 1,000 yards and climbs up these ranks a decent bit. Again, as long as he stays healthy and doesn't fumble the football and kind of projects in that way, which I think is just totally reasonable. That you walk out of the season and you're like, yeah, we got our guy. He's a really good running back. Now, I think another third of the carries here are going to get divvied up to Rachaad White and some of these other names. White, to me, was a good signing for Washington. I think he's a great compliment to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, because I think he allows Merritt to really focus on the early down work, being the lead runner for this team, develop his vision and his ball carrying. So he doesn't have to focus on the pass blocking and the receiving side of things. That is still like a work in progress for Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, even if he's shown some potential in that side of things. Rachaad White is kind of the inverse, where he's very much stalled out as a runner. He's not bad as a runner, but there's not a lot of creativity with him. He doesn't have that ability to change gears that Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt has. Rachaad White is like, give me the ball, I'm running in a straight line. Not that his vision's like bad necessarily. I think it's gotten better over the years, but it's not the best vision in the world. He's more of a gap runner, like tell me where I'm going and I'll run really hard in a straight line and try to run through guys with what power he does have. So like you can give him carries, certainly, especially in your third down situations where teams are expecting pass a little bit more. But White is one of the most refined third down backs in the league. He's an excellent pass protector, and now he gets to protect his buddy, Jaden Daniels, so he might be even better as a pass blocker. Not that he didn't like Baker Mayfield or Tom Brady. I mean, you got to protect Tom Brady, obviously, but it helps when it's your good buddy that you're trying to keep upright and keep healthy. So honestly, that's the best asset that Rachaad White's going to bring to the table, is like bona fide third down pass protection. That doesn't, it's not a glory role, but it really does matter, especially when he's also a really good like screen threat, check and release threat. You can throw him one of those swing passes and his hands, his speed will play. Really good third down back role, who you can also give the ball to, who came here on like 1 year, was it even $3 million? I think it was like 1 year, like $3 million, if my memory serves me well. I'm not the biggest fan of Rachaad White as your number one running back, which at times he had to be in Tampa Bay. But in this role, I love that. And then you have Kaytron Allen, probably not going to see the ball a ton here. I think he's a pro-ready back. In this running back class, Kaytron Allen actually ended up my RB4 just because his floor got him to that point, whereas everybody else was just so project-y and boom or bust. Allen has very little elusiveness and broken tackle ability. He's not fast. He's not the biggest guy, but he's got tremendous vision, patience. He doesn't fumble the ball. He's just kind of a get what's blocked up, solid running back, backup type. And they get him late day 3. And as an RB3, that's a super easy role for Kaytron Allen to just do a little bit of everything. And Jeremy McNichols as well. I don't know how far I want to go with Jeremy McNichols in terms of calling him one of the more underrated players in the league. But pretty much every time this dude touches the ball, I find myself saying, why don't they use him more? He's just he's 31 or 32 years old and has never been that guy, but he's got contact balance. He can catch the ball. He can run all sorts of different schemes. I don't know. If I'm a Commanders fan, I'm really glad Jeremy McNichols is still around, because if we have to, go down the depth chart a little bit, I can really just trust him in so many different spots. I would imagine that's probably your 4. Jerome Ford does get brought in here. I don't really want anything to do with that experience if I'm the Commanders. You've already got Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is your kind of speed threat. Talk about bad vision. Jerome Ford he doesn't really know where he's going. There's not a whole lot of creativity there, but he's fast as hell. Maybe they like him as a kick returner. I don't know, but they do bring him in. And then you have Robert Henry Jr. as well. I like him as a pickup. Very fun highlight reel against a low level of competition. Henry was a tough guy for me to kind of pick whether I liked him or not as a prospect, because he just kept getting into the second level and outrunning future, insurance salesman. But he's only a 4 or 5 or so speed guy. I think as soon as NFL athletes are able to rally and get to him, which they should be able to, there's really not a whole lot else that he brings to the table, but he had a ridiculous amount of breakaway runs in college. If he can find a way to replicate that, why not bring it in? See if he's got it for the next level as he makes that jump. But there's your running back room, a lot of depth, very solid. No one's a superstar yet, at least with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. They rank 28th for me. There's a lot of good running back rooms in the league, but it's not I would call this a weakness or something that's going to hold this team back. I think this is a perfectly reasonable NFL running back room. But let's go ahead and move forward and talk about the pass catchers in Washington. And not to be overly negative, but to change tone for a minute here, I would say if you're a Commanders fan or you're hoping this team has a big year, their offseason with their pass catchers was really underwhelming. They kind of struck out in free agency. There was a lot of rumors that they liked Alec Pierce, and he goes back to the Colts right at the deadline. Romeo Doubs chooses New England over Washington. That was a bit of a blow. And then even in the draft, they choose to go defense over wide receiver early without that second round pick. Their next investment there was Antonio Williams in the 3rd round. But this was a group that needed some help. And as we look at their offseason changes, it didn't get worse. That would have been hard to do, but it didn't get a whole lot better either. I actually said neutral at wide receiver and slightly upgraded at tight end. So to list their changes, at wide receiver, they add Antonio Williams, as I mentioned, in the 3rd round. They bring Diami Brown back, and they sign Van Jefferson. And then I would say, too, part of the striking out as well is I think their fallback plan was Brandon Ayuk. It's feeling less and less likely that they're going to go that route. It could still happen, but he seems off the wall right now, and I don't know how much interest there is in a Jaden Daniels, Brandon Ayuk reunion. Again, maybe that still happens, but it has not to this point. Now, as far as their losses at wide receiver, Pretty minimal. I mean, Deebo Samuel still caught passes and was a decent impact for this team. He was about what you probably could have expected for him, knowing he was a regressing vet. But he's kind of a part of a youth movement here, which I think is smart. Chris Moore is whatever as a loss. But yeah, neutral for me at wide receiver is not what you were hoping to say about this Commanders offseason. And then at tight end, I like the move of signing Chigakonkwo, the youth movement, saying goodbye to Zach Ertz. I said slightly upgraded there, getting a little more juice in that tight end room. But yeah, little underwhelming here. And that's reflected as we break this group down. You do still have Terry McLaurin here. And by the way, he was just ineligible to be listed as an addition. He played 10 games last year. I said it earlier, but if you missed half the games or more, I will consider you an addition. But you do get Terry McLaurin back if you want to, consider that as a reason this group can at least be better than it was last year, which is fair. Considering that with Terry McLaurin. But they ranked 23rd to 27th for me for weaponry, essentially just because you have Terry McLaurin. The rest of this group, as we'll talk about, you need to hit some green lights, to say the least. But as we start with Terry McLaurin, I would say the fact that they get a B- grade, ranked 23rd to 27th, does say a lot about what I think about Terry McLaurin. Still to this day, one of the underrated players in the NFL, was underutilized at Ohio State, has not had the best quarterback play here, had great quarterback play for that 1 year with Jaden Daniels, reminded everybody that he is a top 10 superstar wide receiver, got the contract, and then last year he missed about half the year, unfortunately. But yeah, I freaking love Terry McLaurin. You're so happy he's here as your number one. He, to me, is one of the best vertical threats in the NFL. He's got the deep speed. He's got the ability to play physical through contact, stack corners on the outside. But I've always defended, at least over the last 4 years or so, Terry McLaurin has some of the best, spectacular catch ability. I think George Pickens maybe has taken that as a crown for an individual trait from him. But when the ball is in his area, he just is the definition of finding a way to get it to the ground. And what an asset there for this team. The rest of his game is pretty good. He's a good route runner. He can run other routes. He's not the most fluid athlete, the most incredible route runner, but he can separate over the middle of the field. He's able to decelerate and run hitch routes really well, which is important as a perimeter outside weapon. And he's pretty good after the catch as well. So, we're not talking about a master of all trades, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson type of guy here, but that next crop down as just true number one wide receivers, Terry's freaking awesome, man. So you do still have that. And yes, he's getting a little bit older, but I not really projecting regression quite yet. It's important that this team finds some younger options because Terry can't do this forever. I think for this year, you should still be pretty optimistic, though, that you're going to get relatively in his prime Terry McLaurin back doing his thing here. And that's great. Now, let's go through the rest of these pass catchers. The next receiver you want to talk about is probably rookie Antonio Williams, a third-round pick out of Clemson. More of a slot build type of guy, snappy route runner, short to intermediate, very much a kind of simple evaluation as that archetype slot. All rookies have to come in and prove they can play. It's dangerous to just say a third-round rookie is going to be a starting caliber player right away, but I see a pretty clear path for him to be a very solid slot type of wide receiver. In fact, one of the pro comps I kind of thought of with him was a Jamison Crowder, for example. I think that's very possible for him to be a hit in that sense as a third-round pick. And that kind of makes it this tough balance of Commanders fans will take that. They haven't really had anybody other than Terry McLaurin that they can trust. And I think you can reach a point where you can trust Antonio Williams to be a part of your progressions and work from the slot and be an adequate piece of your passing game. But in reality, that is more of a replaceable skill set, more of a findable skill set, if you will. That's, in a best case scenario for Antonio Williams, you probably don't want him to be anything more than the number 3 option in your passing game. And okay, if you find that guy in the third round, that's totally good and well. But in the context of the Commanders offseason, where you have Terry McLaurin, who's 31 years old, And then Antonio Williams is your big addition. It just is not as exciting as I would want it to be. But he should still be productive as long as things stay as is. There's always the chance of a trade for a guy, or Brandon Ayuk comes in here, or that kind of stuff. But as long as the pecking order looks like this, I think, yeah, Antonio Williams is going to catch a lot of passes here. I will say this. I've seen a lot of like fantasy draft hype on Antonio Williams, like dynasty rookie draft hype. I've stayed away from him a little bit. I think I think people find this conversation interesting from a fantasy perspective. Like, just be careful with that, because, I don't think he's going to be like crazy explosive or be someone that is going to like be in your starting lineup a ton this year. I think he'll be startable and get you like 8 points a week, maybe. But I do think the long-term vision is to bring in other guys. Antonio Williams will naturally fall down the pecking order, be a solid player. That's a reason I've kind of stayed away from him in a lot of these dynasty rookie drafts and stuff. But yeah, in this season, if it's just a redraft league and you're in a super deep league and you need a fourth wide receiver that can get you 5 catches for 50 yards every week and maybe catch a touchdown, that's probably what we're talking about with Antonio Williams. So decent high floor slot wide receiver prospect. I have no issues with the pick. I think the value is fine and all that. And for what it's worth, I like him a lot more than I liked Luke McCaffrey as a 3rd-round pick for this team. But I do look at the rest of this group, and we're going to want to get to a point where we have more to work with here in Washington. Because you have Treylon Burks is probably your other starter. And he's fascinating. He's a 1st-round pick. Came into the league, like, dealt with a lot of stuff. There was a lot of questions about his conditioning. And he dealt with some injuries in Tennessee, but he's a guy that has flashed big time. He even flashed for the Commanders last year with one of the catches of the year, kind of like a one-hander in the end zone that was just gorgeous. He's had some moments for the Titans where like he looked like maybe that A.J. Brown replacement was going to be in there. It's been a week here, a week 2 years later with Treylon Burks. Counting on any semblance of consistency or knowing what you're getting on a week-to-week basis, we can't count on that until we see it. He was a 1st-round pick. He's big, strong, fast, like has playmaking instincts. There's stuff to like from Treylon Burks. That's the extent of the conversation, though. I can't count on anything from him until we see it to some semblance of consistency. He and most depth charts would be like the 5th or 6th guy that you're like, yeah, maybe he makes the team and let's see where it goes. He's in the starting lineup right now. Luke McCaffrey has, his impact at the NFL level has been about what I expected. I never really saw what Luke McCaffrey did all that well. I don't think he's the snappiest route runner. He's not overly fast. He's got, big, strong hands. And that's shown up at some times, but I don't really know what role you give Luke McCaffrey as a starter. I think as a wide receiver 4, he's okay to just kind of do a little bit of everything, and he's been a decent return guy for this team. But as far as his upside, like I think he's probably stalled out in that wide receiver 4 role. They bring back Dyami Brown. If anything happens to Terry McLaurin, you're going to be happy Dyami Brown is here. That skill set, while Brown is extremely frustrating with drops and inconsistency, if you need someone to plug in the event of a Terry McLaurin injury to just run go balls, maybe give you a good week, that can be Dyami Brown. I think Commanders fans are largely familiar with him after he got paid a decent amount of money to go down to Jacksonville and continue to show his drop issues and inconsistency as a point of frustration. But he comes back. Honestly, the player I'm most interested in terms of upside and guy that I'm actually kind of betting on is Jalen Lane. Now, that bet is like, placing one chip on 0. Like, I think it's a decent bet to make on Jalen Lane. I wouldn't be surprised if this works out. Far from a given, but you want that Terry McLaurin replacement long-term, a vertical threat with speed that's flashed some really impressive stuff. There's a path for Jalen Lane, who had some decent moments last year and showed some of the playmaking instincts as a return man for this team too. Was a mid-round draft pick last year that I think still has a lot of potential. He's going to have to continue to earn those targets and prove that he's got it. But he, to me, is fascinating. Van Jefferson, like, okay. He's been the same player since he came into the league, just incredibly inconsistent wide receiver 5 that can do a little bit of everything. I did at least note Brandon Ayuk. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I want to at least cover it in case it does happen, because we still have a decent bit of this offseason to play out here. There's a lot of negative energy around the idea of Brandon Ayuk coming to the Commanders. He's clearly lost it, speeding next to the Niners facilities and like just the way he just didn't show up for rehab with the Niners. And now he's just all on social media. I'm not betting on him. I don't think the Commanders really want to bet on him, but is there a 2% chance that all he really needs is to just get in a new environment and be with his best friend, Jaden Daniels, and he'll get back to going to work and settle the hell down? Is this going to be Antonio Brown with Tom Brady, where it looked like there was no way Antonio Brown could just shut up and play football, but Tom Brady found a way to just reel him in? Can Jaden do that for Brandon Ayuk? That'd be great, because God damn it, they could use Brandon Ayuk. He would fit in so well in this offense. His skill set would work so well with Terry McLaurin. Just a couple years ago, Brandon Ayuk was a top 7-8 wide receiver in the NFL and got a massive contract, and then he fell off as fast as any NFL player could dream of falling off. But even if he signs here, it wouldn't change the ranking or anything like that. I'm still expecting if he signs here, he's just not what he used to be, and he's kind of gone AWOL, whatever it is. It's kind of like a Jalen Lane or, Treylon Burks, Antonio Williams. He's part of the wild card, upside equation, but it's not like he signs here and it's like, okay, good, the Commanders got their number 2 wide receiver. It's more like just more fascination. Nick Nash, kind of a big slot type coming out, was a decent undrafted pickup, but there's your wide receivers. You've got some fascinating pieces, as we talked about. Hopefully they can hit a green light or two. At the very least, can Antonio Williams be like a Jamison Crowder type of wide receiver for this team? And then maybe some combination of Jalen Lane, Treylon Burks, or Brandon Ayuk signing here goes right, in which case you actually might have a decent group to work with. But we're a long way away from that, right? Then you have your tight end room. So they signed Chig Okonkwo. Shout out Chig. Huge RuneScape fan. Brings me back to my childhood, which is cool. Chig Okonkwo, he's one of us. This dude is a nerd. He's posting pictures in full cosplay, in Japan with a samurai outfit. I love Chig's personality. Loved him as a prospect. As a football player, he's in many ways stalled out in terms of kind of is what he is, I think. And I think what that is a very fun, explosive utility player. Getting design touches in his hands, he can take advantage of that. So getting lost on play action, different play calling gimmicks that'll get him lost as a, run after catch weapon, scheme him up, into busted zone windows and up the seam. He can do that stuff. And there's going to be weeks where you find those advantages and he takes advantage and he has big weeks. There's going to be other weeks where I just don't know that he's the most consistent tight end. He lacks the size to get those consistent inline wide tight end reps. John Bates is very much a rotational starter here because he blocks his ass off. And I'm going to try to give John Bates his love in this episode. But that's going to erase a lot of the just consistency with Chig Okonkwo. That's the nature of when you're a tight end, but we can't really pencil you in as the tight end all the time. And then when you're out there, it's we're trying to find ways to get you the ball. It's just that production, that impact on the offense is going to have its ups and downs, its ebbs and flows. And then, in third down drop back game, he's not the most reliable receiver in terms of contested catch wins and hands. Route running is nothing to write home about. He is, I think, what he is. And it's a nice signing for what they gave him. I'm not necessarily looking at this who else are they going to throw the ball to? Obviously they're going to feed Chig Okonkwo and he's going to have this massive breakout season. I don't really see it that way, especially because I think the tight end room is relatively crowded, not just with John Bates, who doesn't get a ton of targets here, but he gets a lot of those snaps at tight end because he's such a good blocker. And then Ben Sinnott, I think if you're the Commanders, it'd be kind of stupid to just ignore that Ben Sinnott is here. They spent a high second round pick on him. I know like sunk cost fallacy and like you don't want to just, stack bad decisions on top of each other, but I don't think Ben Sinnott's like shown to be a bad player necessarily. They just haven't given him opportunities. They brought Zach Ertz back last year. I think you can argue if that was a mistake, if Ben Sinnott should have gotten that opportunity in his second year last year, but he's been very much roadblocked by Ertz and Bates here. But he was a part of a trade down. They could have had Cooper DeJean. They traded down, got a pair of second round picks from the Eagles, and ended up with Mike Sainristil and Ben Sinnott. Like, this is a big investment. So I think they'd be dumb to just like give up on him and not give him some rotational role reps with Chigakonkwo, use him in some heavy personnel. I liked him as a prospect, man. I really did. I think he's got a lot of run after catch chops. I think he's got more to him as a blocker potentially in him if he got more of those opportunities. So this is a big third year for Ben Sinnott, but I'm not quite ready to quit him. So you can definitely see like it's a functional deep tight end room, and I think that probably takes away from Chigakonkwo like having this big breakout year, but Chig should be the leading tight end in terms of targets and yards and that kind of stuff. They also signed Anthony Firkser, who was like kind of a sneaky good tight end like 6 years ago, and then he disappeared. But we'll see if he makes the team. Yankoff and Cager have had cups of coffee in the NFL. Cager was a wide receiver coming out, so they've got a lot of these kind of like undersized types. And then I'm not going to go through the whole running back room again, but as we talked about, you do have Rachaad White, who's just an extremely steady third down back. As this being like a weaponry conversation, I don't know that I would describe Rachaad White necessarily as like this incredible weapon. He's very good at what he does. It's more of like the pass protection is really a benefit for Rachaad White. And then he's just a pretty good, like, standard third down back in terms of pass catching and that kind of stuff. And that's your group of weapons. If anything happens to Terry McLaurin, just like we saw last year, you're in the dark place. Like Terry McLaurin is uplifting a group of pass catchers, maybe more than any group of weapons in the league. So the fact that he got hurt last year and is 31 years old, you're on thin ice already with that. I'm betting on him staying healthy and being pretty good. And even just beyond this year, not that this is a wasted year or far from it, but beyond this year, like you definitely want to come out of this Commanders season and feel like at least something was a hit beyond Terry McLaurin here. So whether that's Antonio Williams, Treylon Burks, Jalen Lane, maybe it's Brandon Ayuk, I don't know. That's a big goal for this team, like for 2027 in Washington and beyond. But let's go ahead and move forward to the offensive line here. Very little offseason changes. They do say goodbye to their starting center, Tyler Biadasz, and they draft, I guess, a potential replacement, but they draft a center in the 6th round in Matt Golbin. But with that draft pedigree, losing a starter like Biadasz, got to say, at least slightly downgraded, though. I think there's far worse losses and things to look at for an offseason change. This offensive line is ultimately still in a pretty good place here. They actually come in as my 11th ranked offensive line, so very good standing there. And 4th to 6th for pass blocking, really towards the top of the league in terms of buying time for Jaden Daniels and keeping him upright. More questions from a run blocking sense, however. They come in 20th there, still not horrible, but a pretty sizable gap between this being right now more of a pass blocking oriented offensive line than a run blocking one. Let's go ahead and run through it. You have Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, which I am hard on this team for being too aggressive and not being more realistic about that 2024 season, trading picks, signing veterans, getting older as a team when they realistically should have still been trying to build things up. One move I did love and still love is the Laramie Tunsil addition. This has been a slam dunk for Washington, really giving up, yes, a pair of additional picks, but most notably that 2nd round pick this year. But considering how Tunsil played last season, that he's still very much in his prime, playing at the peak of his powers at this point in time, though he is, I want to say 31 going on 32. Confirming that real quick. Yes, he turns 32 just before the start of the season, but we've seen offensive linemen be able to play very well into their mid-30s. And while that age can be a little bit of a red flag, there's really no reason to believe that Laremy Tunsil isn't going to continue giving Washington elite pass protection, top 5 left tackle play for another 3 or 4 years. And I'm giving a second round pick and some change for that every day of the week. And that played a factor last year. We didn't get to see it all come together because Jaden played so little. But Laremy Tunsil's freaking awesome, man. He's been this level of player at this point for about 5+ years. I would say around the point where David Bakhtiari's injuries started to pop up, I think Laremy Tunsil entered the equation for who the best pass protecting left tackle in the league is. And to this day, I think he's still in that conversation. You just do not see him lose much at all. For example, last season, he was 4th in the NFL out of 48 eligible tackles in pass blocking efficiency, which sounds like a big number. That's just pressures allowed per snap. Just 10 pressures all season on true pass sets. That's less than 1 per game. He missed 3 games last year. But as far as technique, range, foot speed, anchor, he's teach tape, especially as a pass blocker. Now, as a run blocker, he's just good. It's never been able to match what he does as a pass blocker. That's how he's fallen short of being Lane Johnson or even like Trent Williams, in that conversation. But just short of that, because his run blocking it's just good. He knows what he's doing. He's a solid athlete with solid strength moving forward. Just nothing really special in that sense. And I think just more of a technician's mindset as opposed to a killer mindset. So that shows up just very good run blocker, not the nastiest guy, not the best ability to drive guys off the ball, but perfectly reasonable in that sense as well. So excellent starting point at left tackle, right? That's going to really lift things up to those good rankings we talked about, especially, pushing, top 5 for pass blocking. And then Chris Paul as well next to him. Very he's not nearly the player Laremy Tunsil is, but a similar conversation in the sense of better pass blocker than run blocker. And this is a very split player. He broke out last year, and Washington was able to get him back on a 1-year, $3 million deal. It's like the league hadn't quite been paying attention last year to the fact that Chris Paul, who was, didn't play well to start, was a day 3 pick, took some time with this staff to kind of figure it out. But he was pretty hard to beat as a pass blocker last year, and he's got a great anchor. I think he got better just kind of across the board. The problem is he is still a little bit clunky and uncoordinated, especially as a run blocker. You'll see it occasionally in his losses where he just misses his strikes, stops his feet. But yeah, the run blocking, I think, is another reason he didn't get paid that much. It is genuinely hard to watch, and it is a big reason why they're so much better as a pass blocking offensive line than a run blocking unit. There's a little bit of that, he just is a much more one-dimensional player, but you'll still take that dimension when he's a very good pass blocking guard right now. As long as he can repeat what he did in a breakout season, it's not a guarantee necessarily, but a lot of reason to believe he'll hold on to this job and still be that. He is theoretically athletic. I think it's just the lack of coordination and falling off blocks and leaning too much in the run game that's really hurt him. Now that he's got a good baseline with the pass blocking, it's possible that they can take that next step with him as a run blocker. That'd be pretty rare and not necessarily predicting that happens. But if it does, he is on a 1-year kind of prove it deal in some ways. He could still have further upside, tested very well coming out. And then at center, you have Nick Allegretti, who's been a guard for this team. He's played a few games as a center. I want to say 1 here and 1 in Kansas City. So he's prepared to step in and play center. He's a veteran, and he's been kind of a Band-Aid level starter, both in Kansas City and here. Certainly not a perfect pass blocker. And when left one-on-one, especially as a guard, he's had some games that have been a bit ugly. He's pretty nasty and gets after it in the run game, although he's pretty limited in terms of range and athleticism. So he's not a great run blocker, but he's okay in that sense. I actually do like him as a center here. I actually put the yellow arrow on him because Of course, there's a chance that as a guy that's primarily been a guard that's hardly played any center, that wasn't as good last year, like there's a chance he kind of sucks here and actually loses this job and isn't the guy. But I actually think he's a good fit there. And some of these, fifth, sixth year veteran guys can actually continue to get better and break out. So I wouldn't be surprised if Nick Allegretti kind of settles in sort of a, you think of like Greg Van Roten, Andre James was this way. There's a decent list of these kind of 27-ish year old guys that have always been okay, but just kind of lock in. Austin Schlottman's another guy that's kind of doing that for the Giants and Titans, like kind of in that conversation of player. And someone to keep an eye on to maybe surprise a little bit, despite not being the biggest name or guy you think of in terms of breakout players. But I like what you could get there. Just got to prove it. And then you got Sam Cosmi at right guard. Love that. He's your second best player here. And he came back pretty quickly from, I want to say it was a torn ACL in 2024, got back out there very quickly and had another very steady season. So I think another year removed from that serious injury. Sam Cosmi is easily a top 10 guard in the NFL. I think he's pushed top 5 at times, and then that injury kind of struck at a bad time when he was just starting to get into that kind of like Pro Bowl breath for me. So I wouldn't say he was quite his old self when he came back, but pretty damn close. And I think he's just a very complete, very good guard that honestly Washington got at a bit of a discount when worse guards were getting a little bit more money, basically. But he's a really good player. Expecting pretty clear waters from what you're getting from him at right guard. But then at right tackle, you have Josh Connerly Jr., the year 2 first-round pick from last year, who has the green arrow pointing up on him and is the biggest area for this offensive line in terms of upside and ability to continue pushing up and being real top 10 offensive line, a real strength for this team. It's already a relative strength, but to be even stronger than that. Connerly Jr. is on the right trajectory. He was a very young, reasonable late first round pick that I didn't know if he was going to start right away because they do have an option in Andrew Wiley and they end up going with him. And for the first month or so, it was like, oh, like, was that the best call? Is he going to get Jaden killed back there? And kind of did get Jaden killed for a little bit. But for a little bit, it was like, is he going to actually lose this job? And he's kind of unplayable for a little bit. And then he really settled in, and I would say he was arguably the best pass blocking rookie tackle from week 10, week 9 onward. Where he seemed to have figured it out. Now, you sometimes got to be careful just assuming that, that's the easy, logical trajectory of it, right? Raw rookie, struggles early, gets better as the year goes on. Obviously, he's just becoming a better player. That's the assumption, and a very fair assumption. But sometimes you do see like, it's just a small sample size sport, and maybe there were some weaker matchups in there or something, you never know. But the assumption is, yes, he is on the right trajectory. He has figured it out. He's on this path towards being a really nice pick for the Commanders. And from week 10 onward, he allowed roughly 1.5 pressures per game. And in true pass sets, allowed just over 1 pressure per game. Which he'll absolutely take given how he started the year, how young he is, a very good athlete that flashed like genuine, everything you look for in a franchise, especially pass protecting tackle with the range, the foot speed, when the hands come together. You could see it was all there with him at Oregon, but definitely just inconsistencies. And that obviously showed up in his rookie season just more often in the first part of his season than later. He did have a couple of hiccup games there. Week 15, week 16, he struggled a little bit more against some good, pass rushes in Philly and the Giants. So again, it's not like it was all rainbows and butterflies from week 10 onwards and that you're completely, through the woods with him, but you're definitely feeling good about Josh Connerly continuing to get better and being a good pick and contributing to this being a very good offensive line. So if the pass blocking becomes more consistent and, he's not a bad run blocker, I think there's plenty more for him to learn there. But if he can be more of a top, 10 to 15 right tackle within a year or two, you're really in business with this offensive line for the foreseeable future until you eventually run into a Laramie Tunsil regression problem. But there's your core starters, and then you have pretty decent depth. Like Andrew Wiley, I think it was just assumed that they would trade him around the trade deadline last year because he's just a nice swing lineman who's like a low-end starting tackle. He's played some guard. He's been better at tackle, I think, than at guard. But he definitely gives you some wiggle room. Like, he probably could play center if Allegretti struggles as well. Like, I don't see any reason why not. But if either of your tackles get hurt, you have one of the better backup tackles in the NFL. I think every team should have a valuable swing sixth man of the year type on your O-line. How often do I say only, at best, in the best case scenario seasons, only 3 teams get through a year without any starters, missing more than a game on their O-line. You're going to have injuries here. So to have a guy like Wiley that could realistically plug in anywhere and be a really nice piece of flex tape on that. You love that. And then Brandon Coleman was a 3rd round pick who, admittedly, I was like kind of right about that being a reach. He struggled a lot early. They've struggled to kind of land him as a starter. He ended up struggling as a tackle. They move him into guard. He loses that job to Chris Paul last year. Then they kick him back out to tackle. There's not really room for him as a tackle. But he did seem to be more comfortable at tackle in year 2 in some very limited looks when like Laramie Tunsil missed some games. So admittedly, there is still potential there. And again, he's had some reps at guard. I think as a 7th member of your offensive line, there's way worse pieces to be fascinated by out there in the league. Then you're getting into, deep NFL depth territory. Trent Scott as a tackle piece has played around the league and really struggled. You do draft Matt Gulpin is in the mix at center. If they really like what they see there, he could beat out Nick Allegretti. That's not something I'm expecting. He seemed to me kind of like a dime a dozen backup center prospect when I watched him. I'd be pretty surprised if he like stands out and wins this job, but you never know. And that's pretty much it. You're about 7 deep, so you can really afford an injury here and do better than most teams can because of Andrew Wiley and maybe even 2 injuries with Brandon Coleman. So they're in a really good spot with this offensive line. I think, outside of Jaden Daniels, this is the biggest strength going for the Washington Commanders. But that does round out this offense. So where do they rank for me as we head into the season with all these different question marks? It's 21st in the NFL on offense. Now, there is a ton of upside to transcend that. And honestly, the biggest area for that is going to be with the coaching. Like I said, they rank at the bottom of the league for their coach rankings just being entirely unproven. If they get really good play calling here, and then likely if that happens, you're probably getting more, even higher end quarterback play from Jaden Daniels. Let's even say Jaden Daniels plays like he did in his rookie season. And that was just as a rookie, right? Like, the sky's the limit for Jaden Daniels, as we saw. Like, okay, you put those 2 things together, maybe you get some development with the weapons and a running back maybe. Yeah, this could get back to being closer to a top 10 offense. But right now, there are just so many questions and things that you need to hit those green lights at. As far as the splits are concerned, before we move on to the defense, they rank 18th to 19th, tied 18th to 19th for passing game. The rare tie with these splits, kind of crazy to me that can even happen because it's a big formula and it's not like the variables are the same or even close to the same, but it came out with the exact same digits with our other 18th to 19th ranked passing game. And then 23rd in run game, a little bit lower on that side of things. But let's move over to the defense. And this defense is a big reason why the offense didn't get all of the love this offseason, that they are leaning on Jaden Daniels to uplift some of these different position groups with the offense, because this was one of the slowest, worst defenses in the league last year, and they are really hitting the reset button. And as we kind of go through this thing, and we'll start with the D-line offseason changes, I like a lot of the stuff they did. They have a long ways to go, but I think they went about this offseason the right way for the vast most part. getting faster, getting younger, and especially a team that I've been critical of for like what they did last offseason, going after older, slower vets that are clearly on the decline, kind of going for it in a sense. Where they did spend money was on like fresh off their rookie contract, young free agents that aren't just going to make an impact this year, but if this is more of a build-up season for 2027 and beyond, the money that they did spend is going to still be well spent in 2028, 2029. And I think that is really effective, especially when you talk about like Odafe Owe, Leo Chanel, kind of their big moves, their big money free agent signings. But let's start with the defensive line here. So I have them as slightly upgraded on the interior D-line, but upgraded at edge, and a lot of moving names here. So on the interior D-line, really no notable losses. That's the biggest thing. Like Eddie Goldman, who people wouldn't stop commenting about in the deep dive last year about how good Eddie Goldman is. And I'm like, are we living in 2016? What are we talking about? He was a non-factor. Jalen Holmes, Sheldon Day, whatever. Goodbye. They bring in and bring back one of my guys from his draft class, Tim Settle, who's had a really good career at this point, really good year in Houston last year for what he is. That's a nice signing. They do bring in Charles Omenihu as well. DJ Davidson from the Giants, not as much of an addition there, but yeah, Settle and Omenihu, solid additions to the interior D-line. And then at edge, I do say upgraded. It's not that they lost nobody. Jacob Martin, and I think Commanders fans will agree with this. Jacob Martin, really good player for the Commanders last year. They wanted to get younger there. They know what they had in him. So I get it, but he is a notable loss. Von Miller as well wasn't as much of an impact, of course, which we could have seen coming. But he's no longer with the team. And then Preston Smith as well. So a combined about 90 years, if not more, of age between those three players. And then the additions, much younger. Odafe Owe, who is now on his third team in a calendar year, but had a really good finish to his season with the Chargers and gets a colossal near $100 million contract here with the Commanders. Kayvon Chason, kind of a buy low candidate coming over from the Patriots as well. Really nice addition who we'll talk about. And then a 5th round pick in Joshua Josephs as well. All nice additions to this edge group that I do say, again, upgraded. So a nice offseason with this D-line that is starting to shape up much more. They have a lot more to prove and a lot more room to grow. But they're in a much better place than I've felt about this D-line, especially last season. And signing Odafe Owe is where you're going to start there. Big money free agent. They gave him a massive contract, 4 years, $96 million. And the first, like, they're hitched to him for at least 3 years. And even if they cut him after the third year, it's still a $10 million cap hit for that 4th season. So a lot of guaranteed money, more than half of that contract guaranteed. Is a big bet on Odafe Owe, which I do think was an overpay for what I think he is. Do I understand how the Commanders reached a point where they felt like they really had to be aggressive to get this player? I get it. This D-line really struggled last year. They were sitting at a point in the draft where it was hard to know how things were going to play out, right? Like, you didn't know Ruben Bain was going to be there at 7. You could argue if they still should have taken Ruben Bain anyway. But the draft didn't feel like a, great path for them to go at edge, potentially. So they needed to do something, and I understand it. But look, this is a lot of money for a guy that I think is, in my eyes, a number 2 edge rusher that, depending on what version you get of him, might not even be like a super high-end number 2, more of just like a solid number 2. I mean, you got to remember, just 9 months ago, the Baltimore Ravens, who are desperate for edge rush help, traded him for Alohi Gilman. Like, Odafe Owe was largely a first-round disappointment that kind of was what he was. He gets traded to the Chargers and had some monster games for the Chargers, made himself so much money in a handful of games for the LA Chargers last year. But I'll admit, like, he something seemed to click for him for whatever reason with the Chargers. The spin move was working. He felt more confident in his swipes, his ability to disengage. He was beating blocks better than he ever has, and he actually finished last year 22nd in pass rush win rate. So you did definitely see a guy that, like, if you can get Chargers Odafe Oweh, that I think is worth about $24 million a year. Not more, but not much less. Like, I think that's a really good number 2 edge rusher if you are getting Chargers Odafe Oweh. If you're getting the first 4.5 years of Odafe Oweh and what he was in Baltimore, that's a guy that Baltimore was pretty much willing to let walk and saw as a little more replaceable. Still a good player, but not a tremendous impact. Nothing near someone you're comfortable with being the best edge rusher on your team. So that's kind of where we're at with Odafe Oweh, is like kind of still a show me season. Like, show us that you really did start to figure out the pass rush plan a little bit more. You know, in Baltimore, he was just out athleting people. He had the cross chop and a little power and that speed to bend. And that was about it. I think there was at least moments with the Chargers where, like I said, the ability to disengage and finish was better. And I think highlighted his spin move a little bit more, just as an extra way to win. So call it a necessary evil of a signing that at the end of the day does raise the floor and competency of this defensive line. I don't think you're getting a bad player in any way in Odafe Oweh. It's more of a question of like 2-3 years from now, does the money get a little bit tighter? And do we wish some of that money came out of Odafe Oweh's paycheck when he's not quite living up to it? I think that could very well be a possible future for this Commanders team if he's more of Baltimore Odafe Oweh. But an understandable signing given where the Commanders are at. But in the grand scheme of things, he is the best piece that this team has on paper. And that's obvious. He's their highest paid player on this defensive line. And the best D-lines in the league, Odafe always going to be the 3rd or 4th best guy on that D-line, right? So that's just where the Commanders are at in time, but it's an upgrade from where they were at last year, where they just didn't have even like a legit full-time starter, which Odafe Oweh can be that, obviously. And then the dream here is that Dorrance Armstrong can come back healthy and be the best version of himself. That's not a given. He's 29 years old and isn't the most tremendous athlete to begin with, so if he's losing a little bit of twitch, there can be a line there where things do drop off. So there's a concern with his age and the injury he's coming off of, and that's why they gave away all the money that they did and spent a little money on K'Lavon Chaisson as well. They wanted to set this up where it's anything we can get from Dorrance Armstrong is great. It's house money, but we don't need to count on that. So he is very much a wild card in that sense. I like Dorrance Armstrong when he's healthy. I think he's been, honestly, a very pleasant surprise for the Commanders. A two-way player that has continued to get better as a pass rusher every single year. And him getting hurt last year was a big deal. When he went down, it was like, oh God, like they got nothing on that D-line other than like Josh Martin on 3rd down. So kind of wait and see. The reports of his recovery are positive, but we won't really know until real football starts with him. But he should be available closer to the start of the season, which is definitely a good sign. To me, it's more about what version, like what does he look like, not does he get back out there. But after him, as I mentioned, they signed K'Lavon Chaisson, who had a really nice season in Mike Vrabel's defense to follow up a breakout year from 2024. With the Raiders, you know, he to me, I think he's less in that sort of like prove it territory that he was in last year, where it was kind of a, you know, small sample size with the Raiders when the Patriots signed him. To me, this is more of a like, okay, you've now shown us 2 years of the ability to rush the passer at a pretty decent clip. But a little bit more of a one-dimensional player in the sense that he really struggles against the run. He's severely undersized, and that side of the game just has never really developed for him. But what has developed is the cross chop and a little bit of power. And, you know, former first-round pick, he's got athleticism. Honestly, man, I see a younger version of what Josh Martin was for this team. I think just swapping that makes a lot of sense. So if you're a Commanders fan and you liked Josh Martin for what he brought to the table, as you should, he was a really good situational pass rusher last year. K'Lavon Chaisson is just a younger version of that, is a nice signing. If Armstrong isn't healthy, then Chaisson gets propped up and you run into a lot more early down problems, asking more out of K'Lavon Chaisson as the Patriots did last year. So more of a one-dimensional DPR, designated pass rusher type of player, but a nice signing that I think adds to the floor of the pass rush here. But if Dorrance Armstrong isn't able to play some of those early down reps for you, this team is going to have to get a little bit more creative with the early down run defense on the edge. Odafe Owe is a 3-down, 4-down player, but Chaisson, you ideally won't want him doing that. He's going to have to do it a little bit. You have Javonte Jean-Baptiste, can be a very, like, what you see is what you get, heavy-handed edge rusher, that, edge player that can do a little bit of that. Honestly, what I think could be exciting, and this is in the Dorrance Armstrong is unavailable world for the most part, but even in some of your rotations, Frankie Luvu is still on this team, and we haven't done the linebackers yet, but you're talking about the Brian Flores world of defensive schemes with Andrew Van Ginkel being the prominent name as that hybrid edge Belichickian linebacker. Frankie Luvu's done a little bit of everything. There's not really a spot for him as an off-ball linebacker anymore with what they did at linebacker. Luvu could go back to being an edge, and honestly, that works for me. It's not the most absurd group with Owe, Chaisson as your designated pass rusher and Frankie Luvu doing the early down stuff, but that's a very practical, functional group. I can get behind that. So we'll see if that's the direction they go with Luvu, but I think he's got to be at least brought up because I could see it. They do also have Drake Jackson, who was a bust for the Niners and played a couple snaps for this team last year. And then I didn't mention Joshua Josephs either. He is very much in that situational designated pass rush role. I think he'll get some snaps here. But I think he's probably more of a draft, stash, and develop type of guy. Unplayable on rundowns right now, undersized, coming out of that Tennessee defense. A lot of questions about 3-down work for him. And then it's just harder to get those snaps on 3rd down where you have Owe and Chaisson getting after it. If Armstrong's healthy, it's just harder to find those snaps for Joshua Joseph. But if you don't want to pay Chaisson long-term, like Joseph's could be that, I think as a 5th-round pick, he's got twitch. He's got some different rush moves, good with his hands. He's got a path to be an impactful pass rusher at the NFL level. I just don't know that we're going to get that too much this year unless you get some injuries. But that's your edge group. It's like a totally reasonable, solid, fine room that you're going to want more in the future from. I think that's very fair to say. Now, the interior of the D-line, again, it's okay. They have depth. Not a whole lot to get excited about, though. You really have 4 starters with the interior D-line. You could throw any of them up there with the starting graphic. I've got Daron Payne and Javon Kinlaw up there. I think this is probably pretty damn close to a 4-way split. These guys all do a little bit of something different. Daron Payne is more of your traditional kind of stout defensive tackle. His play against the run has faltered quite a bit, really for 4 straight years. That was kind of what he did best coming out of Alabama. And it's not that he's bad at it. He's good at getting off blocks, but he just hasn't found himself in playmaking range. He will get driven off the ball despite having the size to hold his own. He's just an okay, still a pretty good run defender, but as your best piece, it's just not really who he is at this point in his career. And then as a rusher, he kind of has these splash moments where you're like, why can't you do that more often? But for the most part, he's just a solid, balanced starting D tackle that's kind of getting progressively worse every year, who's played a lot of snaps to this point. So you kind of know what you're getting in Daron Payne. Commanders fans certainly do, because he's been here doing this for a long time. Javon Kinlaw was an overpay in free agency last year, but he can get off the ball. And for a team that's going to blitz and loop and do all these creative things, he does have that bazooka without a targeting system ability to just launch himself off the ball forward. So behind the controls of a very good blitz designer, Kinlaw can still have usefulness, and his impact as a pass rusher is still an impact. It's just, he's not really going to be deconstructing one-on-one blocks or making Pro Bowls or really, live up to his contract. Like, he's just an okay player that I just can't for the life of me understand why they valued him as much as they did, a 3-year, $45 million contract. They're stuck with him this year. I would almost guarantee they release him after this year, but it's still a $6.6 million dead cap with a $6 million void year in 2028. Like, just a horrible contract. But it's not that he has like no usefulness at all. Tim Settle, very balanced player in terms of the end result. He's a unique guy. Commanders fans will remember him. I think he's gotten incrementally better since those days. But a massive upper body, light legs. So he actually has some agility about him, and that helps him win as a rusher at times. He can hold his own as a run defender as well, just because of that massive upper body. Depending on the blocker and the situation, like, the lighter lower half can work against him. So, like, he's a little bit more situational, I suppose. Call it inconsistent, but a really good, like, two-way defensive tackle. They gave him a 3-year, $25 million deal, and that's kind of like DT3 money. He's going to be in the mix with this starting unit. Very solid overall player, even if it's not someone you're going to get overly excited about. And then you've got Jer'Jon Newton, year 3 for him, high second-round pick, someone that got a lot of first-round buzz in his draft class, a pick I really liked. And it's been a up and down start for Newton. Started off injured. That was a part of his kind of draft fall. So a slower start to his rookie season. And then year 2 for him was, I would say it's consistent with a lot of these just lighter, pass rush oriented, explosive defensive tackle prospects. Devontae Wyatt, Brian Brzee, maybe on the high end, like, Kalijah Cansey. Like, okay, he's going to have his issues as a run defender. It's harder to put him out there on earlier downs. But, in so many of these guys' cases, earlier in their career, you can see the moments, whether it's the explosiveness in the bull rush, some of the finesse. There are games with Newton where he's a legit problem for the opponent, and then he'll just turn around and disappear for a month. And it's just kind of bizarre where, there's been a few of these guys. I think Newton's one of them. But I don't think the book needs to be written on Johnny Newton here after his second season. He's the only player in this defensive line that gets the up arrow for me. I think it is a big third year for him to prove that he's more than just a kind of low end situational pass rusher. He missed so much of that first training camp last year. I'm not going to say last year was his rookie season, but clearly, like, he's had a slower go about it. I think just with hopefully a clean bill of health, just new scheme, like, coming in, I could see this being a good year in a sort of Brian Flores crafted front that's very good with these athletes. You look at like what Jalen Redmond developed into. Johnny Newton could absolutely be something like Jalen Redmond for the Vikings, which is, I mean, it's kind of off the radar breakout, but anybody that watched the Vikings understands, like, okay, that's a legit starter. That in this D line starts to ramp things up a good bit. Even if you don't have that Batman number 1 type of guy, if you can get a bunch of number 2 types, you can start to be in business. So, like, if Newton breaks through, if Owe is what he was for the Chargers and not for the Ravens, if Armstrong can get and stay healthy, this could be top 15 to 20, I think, as a D-line. You're still missing really big upside, but if you're looking for a best case scenario with this group, that's kind of the dream, I think, for this season, at least. And it's those combination of players, Owe, Armstrong, and Newton, really why the Commanders get the wild card icon for this defensive line, because there is a path, like I just described, for this to be at least a pretty good unit. Whereas right now, and I haven't said this team's rankings yet, but right now they rank 27th to 28th for overall D-line, 24th to 28th for pass rush, 21st to 24th for D-line run defense. So we're in like okay territory It's more of like finding that road towards this being a pretty decent to good D line that you're looking for those green lights. There's a couple more interior D-line pieces that I didn't mention there. You got Charles Omenihu, who could come into the mix here. Another kind of hybrid DN guy that maybe in a kind of 3-4 odd style front can be leveraged and have a good year here. It's not that he's really struggled when he's played. He had that big injury a few years ago, and he's just kind of dropped down to like rotational journeyman like pretty quickly after being a decent impact player coming from the Niners going to he went Texans, Niners, Chiefs. Now he's here with the Commanders. He's really bounced around, but he's still had his good moments, and he brings a little bit of something different just for those 5-man fronts as a 4-eye, as a heavy-handed D end, as a 5-tech. Like, it's a nice chess piece to have. I'd rather you have him than you don't. So curious to see how they use him and if maybe he could have a nice year here. And then if they make the team, DJ Davidson, Shai Tuttle have both played a decent amount in the league at this point. So you could do worse in terms of like deep run defense depth. Overall, yeah, like depth is not really a problem for this D-line. It's just kind of upside and really trying to thread that needle, find that narrow path towards upside with this group, which is likely missing. But if you really squint and drink a little Commander's Kool-Aid, you can see a half decent defensive line come together here. But let's go to the linebackers, probably the most anticipated portion of this Commanders deep dive, because not gonna lie, man, what the Commanders did at linebacker gets you fired up, man. They bring in Sonny Styles as that big first-round pick, the 7th overall pick in the draft, and then they signed one of my favorite players in the NFL, Leo Chenal, over from the Kansas City Chiefs. He gets his first opportunity as a real starting linebacker, and they say goodbye to Bobby Wagner, which I did have to note as a moderate loss, but he's like naturally, from a coverage standpoint, like addition by subtraction, but it's a loss in terms of having that physical commander in the pun unintended on that one, but having him in the middle of your defense, kind of getting everybody lined up, getting off blocks, playing the run. He still did some stuff, but it was time to get faster and younger at linebacker, and they absolutely did that. And I do look at this as an upgraded linebacker room. Let's have some fun. Let's break this group down. You can really flip a coin and decide where you want to start. I think there's reasons to be excited about both of these players. I think Commanders fans will want me to start with Sonny Styles, so that's what we're going to do. Spent a lot of time talking about Sonny Styles, where he should go in the draft. I kind of became known as the Sonny Styles hater in the draft analyst world. I don't hate Sonny Styles. He ended up the 10th player on my big board. I did kind of push back on the idea that he should go 2nd, 3rd, 4th, maybe even 5th in the draft. When you're passing on, potential blue chip players at game-changing positions as a top 5 pick, the conversation just shifts. You start to get a little bit later in the draft, around that 7 range. That was right at the peak of when I can start to get comfortable with Sonny Styles, with how I saw him as a prospect. And a lot of this is like rehashing points. I really got into it in my top 10 linebacker rankings for the 2026 draft. If you want to hear even more about like real game theory and the linebacker position, but just like a couple quick summarizing points of why I think taking Sonny Styles this early has its risks is it's a position that has the highest bust rate of first round players. While Sonny Styles' athletic profile, it's like you can't argue with it, right? Like this dude was not born on earth. He's 6'5", 245. The testing profile, it's like, that guy would be like the number 1 pick in all your Madden fantasy drafts. Like the theoretical upside of a guy that freaky that can run, jump, move like that on tape. You see the guy move, it's not just the speed and the burst, like the fluidity. There's a reason he got a lot of Fred Warner comps, because the way Fred kind of glides in space, you see that with Sonny Styles, with the length being kind of similar. Like I get the upside side of things with Sonny Styles, and it is even another level above that super long list of first round busts at linebacker. Isaiah Simmons, Devin White, Yes, was a bust. Don't let the blitzing fool you. Jamin Davis here in Washington, Quay Walker, Patrick Queen, Tremaine Edmonds, which was my kind of mid to low range comp on Sonny Styles, is an interesting player to bring up because Edmonds got some of those comps to someone like a Brian Urlacher, which you saw for Sonny Styles as well, because he's 6'5", he runs like the wind, super young, like good head on his shoulders, just an okay player, right? And I've made the points that like Fred Warner isn't great because he's built like those first round linebackers. He's athletic, but he's a 4.6 speed guy. He's not this uber freak. He's a great athlete, but he's not great because he's an uber freak. Fred Warner is that level of player because of his mind and his instincts and his just knowledge at the position that is generational. And that's not what makes Sonny Styles such a great prospect. It's the athleticism is the big selling point and some of the splash plays. But at the end of the day, I do understand why, and I even did like my high-end comp on Sonny Styles is Fred Warner because of all those reasons. But I think with that being by far the most common comp on Sonny Styles, people become very attached to that, the athletic profile, the Ohio State helmet, and assume that he's going to be Fred Warner and be Fred Warner immediately. And it's like, that is actually very unrealistic given the history of this position, how hard this position is, and honestly what his tape was at Ohio State. I think if you didn't know his athletic profile and you just watched the tape, you would say that's a really good linebacker prospect. He's a first-round guy. He could be a difference maker at the NFL level, not like, yep, that's a generational linebacker prospect. That's my opinion. I know some people disagree with that, and that's what makes this all so fun, right? But the athletic profile just kind of set it over the edge and created this hype train that was like, he's the best player in the draft. And I couldn't get there with him. I thought he was the 10th player in the draft. They took him 7th, and that's reasonable, right? But my biggest point with drafting Sonny Styles and drafting a linebacker this high is if you're realistic about this position, it's known as the running back of the defense. And honestly, the value of this position is it's now transcended below what the top running backs are making. It is so damn hard to genuinely, on a week-to-week basis, change games from this position. You have to be so good at it. You have to be like a Demario Davis level run defender. You have to be what Fred Warner does. I think Jack Campbell, Jordan Brooks, maybe from a run defense standpoint, but even then you've got some coverage questions. I think there's a cluster of between 4 to 6 linebackers any given year that are so good that they genuinely elevate a defense. 4 to 6 out of 64 starters in the league, right? Then you have a massive cluster, and I'm not, overgeneralizing a little bit, but this is pretty reasonable, and the league's contract values and stuff reflect this. You have this middle range of just starting caliber players where it's like they set the floor, they do their job. They're of course going to have some bad plays. They're going to have some games that are better than others, but we can't have a bottom 3 linebacker room in the NFL. And you end up with this massive cluster of linebackers like 7 through 40 that are all just like pretty good players. And then you got your issue players, many of which are super athletic former first round busts, by the way. But I don't think Sonny Styles will be in that issue player category. I think the concern with spending this high of a pick on Sonny Styles is that he's in that range of pretty good players, that he's a Tremaine Edmonds, so to speak, which I don't think is out of the range of possibilities. I would say that's probably his median outcome, is something like that. And that's a fine player, but is it worth the 7th pick in the draft? I think that's pretty obvious no. He really has to have everything click and be that kind of like Fred Warner type of player. And if that does happen, does it take 3 years to get there as well? Because this position takes a long time to develop. It's all about a value proposition with drafting a linebacker that high. It's a very nerdy conversation that I enjoy. Some people are like, dude, just shut up and talk about Sonny Styles and how electric he is. So I get it. The analysis has been laid, and at this point, yes, I am super excited to watch Sonny Styles. The upside speaks for itself. I think especially the coverage side of things should come along sooner rather than later. Any young linebacker is going to have to learn route development and taking stuff away. I think there's good signs of it with Sonny Styles, but his ability to carry even like slot wide receivers and get range, like in cover 2 mid read, like this dude can move like a safety. He was a safety at a time. There's so much to like from a coverage standpoint. The blitzing is explosive. I want to see even more. One thing that Sonny Styles does, and this applies to his run defense as well, but his blitzing as well, he does play like really eager to just blow up blocks, and that's fun, but actually doesn't lead to the best results. And actually, most of the time as a blitzer, when he would scream through, he would just go head first, even shoulder first into the running back. He might destroy that running back, but he would go down to the ground with him. And the quarterback's like, oh, great, you took Sonny Styles out of the play. An effective blitzer, yes, has power and the ability to do that, but can deconstruct that block and actually finish the play. So there's a lot with his blitzing and his block take-ons as a run defender in that sense too, where he's just like, boom, I'm smashing my head into the play. And then he gets swallowed up by the run and the running back just blew open for a 15-yard run. So there's stuff to clean up with his game across the board. But overall, like coverage, blitzing should be better sooner rather than later. The run defense is where I saw more issues with his tape, and that's where I found myself pushing back on the Sonny Styles love. It's easy to see the good plays, like the Indiana game. There's like some incredible moments, and that was his last game of the year. So you're like, oh, he figured it out. But you go just a game earlier or 2 games earlier, the Michigan game, the last game of the year, I think was maybe his worst game of the year as a run defender. And there were some serious issues with him, slow to diagnose the runs, taking bad angles, not scraping over the top. There's just like there are with so many of these young linebackers, there's so much to learn. And I would be lying if I said there aren't some of the same red flags with Sonny Styles' run defense tape that made me a little more shy with some of these other first-round linebackers. I agree. Like, this dude's physical profile, it's going to be really hard to fail. He is one of the most elite athletes that's ever entered the NFL, and I get that side of things. So let's end on a positive note. Like, everybody says this guy is wired the right way, that, you know, the developmental trajectory for him screams like this dude's going to be a superstar. If you get the right stuff mentally with his physical profile, you are talking about like a Fred Warner, Brian Urlacher, Luke Kuechly type of linebacker. And if you get that guy, hell yes, that is a transformative player for your defense. So I'm not trying to write off the possibility that player is in there. I understand that. It's just there's probably an 80% outcome where he's probably just like an okay player. And you're like, well, he wasn't a bust, but, you know, like his tape at Ohio State, it's like, that's a pretty good linebacker. But, you know, not necessarily somebody you watch every week and he's like, oh my God, that's the best player in the defense. He's changing games for the Buckeyes defense. Like, I don't think he really changed games for the Buckeyes defense for the most part. So he's going to have to be an even better player at the next level than he was at Ohio State. And it doesn't always happen. So there's the Sonny Styles conversation. I'm super excited to watch him. Obviously, his upside could put the Commanders defense in very favorable territory. And I will end on this point. Going from Bobby Wagner to Sonny Styles might be one of the most dramatic speed shifts that we've seen in a position group in a long time. This defense felt slow last year. It just did. And I love Bobby Wagner, but it's probably time. And the one thing I don't have any questions about with Sonny Styles is his ability to fly to the sidelines and finish as a tackler. Like 100%. Like I said, he's still the 10th player on my board. That's what he did best, was get to the ball, get guys to the ground, prevent big plays. He will do that 100%. So there is a lot to like here. And I'm just at this point, you know, that's the last time I need to have these Sonny Styles draft value debate. That was a big part of this draft season, but I'm just really excited to watch him at this point and see what kind of player he can become. And then I can take a deep breath, and I will, because it's a lot, because I get pretty fired up talking about Sonny Styles, but Leo Chenal, I can get fired up talking about Leo Chenal all day. I was stunned that he didn't get paid more. And this comes back to the root of the conversation. Like, the league just doesn't really value these guys. And I honestly was a little surprised they did draft Sonny Styles because they stole Leo Chanel in free agency. I thought that was a reminder of like, yeah, you can find really good linebackers in free agency on a good deal. And Leo Chanel, to me, was one of the most exciting free agents of this cycle because I know he's a good player. I do. The run defense for him, I just have a hard time seeing him not being a top 10 to 15 run defending linebacker in the league. I think he's got a good chance to be more than that. But the floor with him as a run defender is so tremendously high that I love that part of things. But the reason I get so excited about Leo Chanel is he didn't really start for the Chiefs. They had Drew Tranquil, they had Nick Bolton, two very good linebackers. Leo Chanel comes in as a third-round pick. For me, Leo Chanel was a first to second round graded player. Loved him in that draft class. Still mad at my Packers for drafting Quay Walker over this guy when he was right in your backyard. But Chanel has been tasked with that kind of like base strong side linebacker role where he's largely played about 40% of snaps for the Chiefs, some games more than others, depending on the opponent and how much base they want to run. But in that role, Leo Chanel has been dominant. Like he was a candidate for Super Bowl MVP, 100%. I think that was the Eagles Super Bowl. There's so many Chiefs Super Bowls that I kind of lose track, but he had a Super Bowl. It was like, he's the best player on the field. But yeah, this dude's 250 pounds, plays with his absolute hair on fire. I think the diagnostics we've seen, like he gets there in a hurry. He's going to be tasked with more. He can't just be over aggressive and headhunt. He's going to have to prove even more from a run diagnostic standpoint, but I think he's ready, having been groomed in Kansas City. But like, dude, in terms of the combination of speed, stopping power, tackling, block shedding ability, it doesn't get any better than how Leo Chanel is built. And that shows up as a blitzer as well, where they're going to have a ton of fun setting him after it. And then the big question with Leo Chanel is going to be, how does he handle larger coverage responsibilities? You know, I think he's a little stiffer in terms of turning his hips and getting range and doing a lot of that stuff. Well, you've got Sonny Styles next to him if you want to run a cover two mid-read or do more creative things with your linebacker. All the things that you might have questions about Leo Chanel doing, Sonny Styles is there to do those things. So it's a perfect pairing now that these guys are together. But it's not like Leo Chanel can't cover. I think he's shown in some of those more simple assignments, just hook zones and playing the flat, like he's got the ability to move out in space, finish plays in space, and enough reactive ability and coverage to at least be okay. He may never be a great cover linebacker, but can he be a solid one and maybe an elite run defender and a good blitzer? Hell yeah, dude. Like, I always compared Leo Chanel to Demario Davis, and I wouldn't be stunned if Leo Chanel breaks out in his fifth season here. I even talk a lot about like this is the breakout range for most NFL linebackers is years 3 to 6. And getting this opportunity here is massive. This was my single favorite free agent signing of the offseason. I cannot wait to see him. And I love him with Sonny Styles as we broke that down. Like the way these guys play off each other. If you've got concerns about Styles as a run defender, Leo Chanel, I think, makes up for that. And if you've got, inversely coverage questions on Chanel, Styles makes up for that. So this is like, right now they rank 19th because Styles comes into the league entirely unproven. And Leo Chanel hasn't even been a full-time starter yet. So, like, we're ranking proven commodities. There's still there's still up arrow on both these guys. They got to go out and prove it to earn those top rankings. But if this is a top 3, if not the best linebacker room in the league by the end of next season, it's not hard for me to picture that outcome at all. And honestly, like, even this year, if Leo Chanel is Demario Davis, and if Sonny Styles is just Tremaine Edmonds, that's still top 5, if not top 3. So like they've got their linebacker room covered, to say the least. And we're not quite done either. They do have Frankie Louvu, who we broke down. I think, barring injury, I do think how we describe Frankie Louvu playing that kind of Andrew Van Ginkel role is probably the most realistic projection for him. And he probably would have been cut by now if Daronte Jones didn't say, hold on, we can have a use for this player, especially if Dorrance Armstrong's got some questions off the edge there for injuries. Luvu's regressing, and, he's kind of this interesting hybrid player, but in that role, I do really like him. And as a blitzer, and I would also add, I mentioned it earlier, but if they are going to run those 5-1 fronts with Sonny Styles as your middle linebacker, Leo Chenal has played some edge for the Chiefs as well. So in that defense with 3 safeties, Sonny Styles, Leo Chenal can also do the Andrew Van Ginkel stuff. That's a phenomenal pairing as well. That's not a starting role for Leo Chenal, but it's just another thing he can do and more flexibility. So this group is just so fun. And then you have Jordan McGee. I'm not done with Jordan McGee. He was a draft and stash athlete that hasn't gotten a ton of opportunities, but as a special teamer and still a developmental piece and a 4th linebacker, I like that. Kane Medrano, if he makes this team, was a developmental pick behind that. And then Nick Bellore as well is still playing. He's 37, 38 years old, has played both linebacker and fullback in the NFL. Really just a special teamer, but a fun name to have on your roster that is worth shouting out. So there's your linebacker room. Electric fun group. The sky is literally the limit for these two guys together. Cannot wait to watch it. But right now, they still got to go out and prove it. They rank 19th for overall linebacker, 17th to 19th for run defense, 19th to 24th for coverage. But then we go to the secondary, and they did make some changes here, but maybe not the most incredible eye-opening changes. But as we look at cornerback, they say goodbye to Marshawn Lattimore, who played about half their snaps last year. Jonathan Jones, a veteran on the way out. Noah Igbinoghene as well. As far as additions go, they do get Trey Amos back, who played just short of a half a season last year. Their second-round pick last year. And then they sign Amik Robertson over from Detroit and Akello Witherspoon. So with how much Lattimore really struggled here, it's hard to call him too much of a loss. I think a full season, hopefully, of Amos and Amik Robertson is at least a slight upgrade at cornerback, even if it's nothing outrageous. At safety, I also said slightly upgraded. They say goodbye to Darnell Savage, good riddance. And then they get Will Harris back, who also got hurt and played about half the year last year. And then they do sign Nick Cross as well, 2-year, $13 million contract to kind of come in and hopefully continue to get better. Still a young player coming over from the Colts. I mentioned the money they did spend for the most part was younger players. Nick Cross came into the league at 20 years old. He's heading into his second NFL contract. He's not even 25 yet. So that's a reasonable signing to make. So slightly upgraded in the secondary. Let's get into this unit. It is an area of concern for me, to say the least, but there is potential here for this to at least not be a weakness for the Commanders. I think that's the goal this year, is for just get through this year and hit some green lights and this unit be okay. Right now, with those concerns, they do rank as my 31st ranked secondary. But they do get the wild card icon because they do have the upside to not be that low and to not be a huge weakness. So you start with Trey Amos as probably the biggest area of upside. Loved this as a second-round pick last year. Started really strong, had a couple of down games, and then got hurt for the year. So getting him back healthy, getting him back on track, it's hard for any young corner to just have a perfect rookie season. So you were always going to expect some ups and downs, as you would with any rookie corner, but Amos is big. He's a super smart zone corner. As we saw, the Vikings have run a lot of zone defense. Should be pretty comfortable in that role. He's physical to play the ball. And another thing I liked about him at Ole Miss was he actually has decent long speed, can hang, using some of that physical ability to be more of a bump and run corner if you want to go man coverage. We don't know how much they're going to run that here, but he gives you a little bit of that flexibility to do that. Really a complete player. I want to see him tackle a little bit better. Got to keep him healthy and keep proving it, but I like the trajectory for him. If nothing else, as a good CB2, he doesn't have the most incredible traits. He's got good traits. if he settles as a solid second corner, I wouldn't be stunned, but he might reach the level of being like a decent number one as well. There's a little bit like Jalen Johnson, maybe, who reached, that level of a number one corner for the Bears. Big, physical, smart corner that you wouldn't, the first thing you say about him wouldn't be he's really fast, right? So that's the hope for Trey Amos, and the hope that it doesn't go in the opposite direction. I'm overall just like pretty damn optimistic with Amos as long as he stays healthy, though. Then you have Mike Sainristil. I'm not as optimistic with him, but still optimistic. They're going to move him back outside, it seems. He's played a little bit of both, slot and outside. I think with 2 years of evidence, it's pretty damn clear he is an outside corner. He has struggled much more breaking things down quickly and hanging as a run defender consistently from the slot. But when he's been stuck outside, especially in zone coverage, you see the ball skills, the instincts, the ability to read the quarterback's eyes, understanding route combinations. He had that playoff game against Detroit that was like a holy shit type of game, making plays on the ball, changing the outcome of that NFC divisional round. But it's been more flashes for him, but definitely has been more comfortable outside than from the slot. So as long as that's the plan, I think as all these kind of undersized zone style corners, whether that is Byron Murphy being your Vikings comp, or, a Darius Williams, those being the like best case scenarios for Mikey Sainristil, where maybe he could also be a solid number two, and you got Amos and Sainristil. Like, there's a world where you get through this season and you like what you have there, and that would be a dream. If you can say we got our outside corners that we drafted in the second round in the last 2 years, set it and forget it. That'd be great. We're far from that being an established thing, but it's possible. But I do think in Sainristil's case, there's also an outcome where he's more of a backup, a CB4 type that can do a little bit of everything, but maybe just not consistent enough to be a starter for you. So big third year for him. And then you sign Amik Robertson, who's going to go back into the slot, kind of inverse of Mike Sainristil, where Robertson has played his best ball as a slot corner, but has been tasked with playing a little bit more outside for Detroit with how beat up their cornerback room has been. So I think Robertson is what he is. He's quick, frisky, and fits the mold of kind of a traditional slot corner. Just kind of being that thorn in opposing defense's side. He's not the most physically imposing as a run defender, but he's definitely going to make his presence felt where he can. He's going to hit hard and give it his all. And he's a little streaky as a coverage defender, but overall pretty solid. Probably more of a better man corner than a zone corner, so that could be a conflicting thing in terms of the scheme here. But why not sign Amik Robertson as a bounce back candidate after a down year in Detroit last year? So a very solid signing to just kind of raise the floor in the slot, but nothing to be like overly stoked about either. And then you get into the rest of your cornerback depth. You've got some vets that are journeyman vets at this point. Akello Witherspoon, Antonio Hamilton, reasonable NFL backups, but they're going to get beat if they're out there. Darius Rush, Trey Hawkins, more like traits based. Let's see if they've learned a thing or two with having a cup of coffee in the NFL, and then a bunch of other, undrafted, scrap heap type names as well. So it's, you have potential with Amos and Sainristil as your outside duo. They got to go out and prove it. And then it's journeyman. It's just not a great group of corners. If Amos and Sainristil look great, you can continue to fill in the rest of this with journeyman types. Otherwise, they're going to need to keep getting to work in future off seasons. Pretty clear runway, though, which I like for Amos and Sainristil to go out and prove it. And then you have your safety room, which in a weird, twisted kind of way, I kind of like, and I'm kind of like strangely optimistic about this group, but there's not a whole lot to stand on to rank these guys all this high. But when I look especially at the safety trio in Minnesota, I can easily picture how Will Harris, Nick Cross, and Quan Martin fill those roles of when it was all working. Your true free safety in Bynum, who ended up going to the Colts, played a year with Nick Cross. Harrison Smith, who's your do-it-all up and down strong safety, and then that true big nickel style Josh Metellus. You can see that picture working out here with these three guys in terms of what their skill sets are. It's just these guys are largely unproven. And Will Harris is just old. He's a 30 going on 31-year-old safety that's never been a consistent starter in the NFL. But Will Harris has pretty consistently over the last couple years stood out to me as like a good coverage safety. He's not much of a presence or like stable tackler as a run defender, but he's not putrid in that sense. I think he's kind of carved out a late career breakout as a just solid starting caliber safety that maybe isn't done getting better, but he's an interesting player coming back from injury. I thought he was one of the better players on this Commanders defense before he got hurt. So it's good to get him back. If nothing else, he's a floor raiser as your free safety. And then they signed Nick Cross. 2-year, $13 million deal is not a ton of money. He's just been incredibly up and down as a Colts safety. I think the macro trajectory shows you a guy that has gotten better, came into the league at 20 years old, really no idea what he was doing. You've still seen, though, even the last 2 years, it's like a lot of coverage busts, a lot of just not being where you need him to be in coverage. But the run defense has really come along with him. He's a big, stocky dude with a ton of traits. So if you're talking about, like, is he physically similar to Harrison Smith? Yes. He ain't Harrison Smith, but if the coverage stuff can just get a little bit better and at least eliminate some of those coverage busts, him in this style defense could really work. It was a good signing. They didn't have a lot of other answers here, and why not take a flyer on Nick Cross? If nothing else, you're getting faster on the back end and more physical and a good tackler. If you reach a point where the coverage is so bad that you got to move on, then you move on. But, still young and hopefully can continue to get better in that sense. And then you got Quan Martin, and I wanted to put him up there. This is very wait and see as far as do they run a 3-safety defense, because they do have those great linebackers. Technically, that would mean they aren't going to really live in that 5-1 kind of hybrid structure that I detailed in the scheme section. But if they do want to take Leo Chanel and stick him as an edge player for earlier downs, that's an option. And then you could have either Quan Martin or Nick Cross, honestly, be that Josh Metellus role. Quan Martin isn't quite as big as like Josh Metellus, but theoretically, that's what he did really well at Illinois that made him a second-round pick. I don't want to spend too much time on Quan Martin because he's been pretty rough, especially in terms of coverage busts and just, bad games for the Commanders. He's kind of just lost his opportunities here the more and more time has gone on. But there's some pathways, whether it's in those 3-safety defenses or if Nick Cross struggles or if Will Harris can't stay healthy, new scheme, creative ways to use a guy like Quan Martin. You've already got a nickel situation with Amik Robertson that's kind of like whatever. So one more year for Quan Martin just to kind of see if there's anything there. And then you got more like special teamers with Jeremy Reeves. I think Percy Butler at this point, he got a lot of starts as a safety, but it wasn't pretty. More of a special teamer there, but a lot of speed from him on the back end. Tyler Owens as a physical profile is fascinating. If you're looking for that Josh Metellus, who really did come out of nowhere for the Vikings. Tyler Owens, about 6'1", 215. Got to keep an eye on that. Has played a tiny bit in the league. Just from a scheme fit perspective, he caught my eye as someone that maybe is worth a shout out here. But that's really it. I think you can see how this secondary ranks quite low. They don't have a single proven piece. Just some areas of fascination, and sometimes you can hit some surprising green lights. And if you do, hit 2 or 3 green lights with Amos, Sainristil, Cross, maybe Quan Martin, this could be a serviceable secondary to get you through the year as you continue to build this group up. But this could also be closer to like it was last year, a very beatable, replaceable group that is going to need to continue to get some more talent added to it. So that's how they ended up 31st for overall secondary. And that wraps up this Commanders defense. So the Commanders came out as my 24th ranked defense. And the thing that stands out to me as I look at this unit is they have raised the floor with all of these offseason moves, and I think surrounded this group of players with hopefully some really good coaching. And it's hard to be as bad as they were last year, one of the worst defenses in the league, when you have more depth, you have more of a floor, and you have good coaching. What also stands out, though, is the complete and utter lack of a star player, even like a stud player. I mean, we color code all these players. I know we have our podcast listeners, so shout out to the people listening through the Fully Inflated Football Show. But we color code all these players with their grades, and there's purple elite coded players, there's blue coded superstar players, there's a light blue coded like stud area of players that are more difference makers. And then you got yellows and greens, which are starting caliber players, but not difference makers. This defense doesn't have even a light blue on it. And there's not a ton of paths to get that. I think Leo Chanel, maybe Sonny Styles, always fringe. But I think you're more about like, okay, for this season, as we transition more towards like the team projections and the team summary, for this season, it's like, it's almost like that Cincinnati Bengals philosophy is like, can we just get to 22? Can we just be the 22nd defense in the league? Let's allow 23.5 points a game. And I just looked it up because I was spitballing it. I actually did pretty good. 22nd in the league last year was 24.3 points per game. So if we allow less than 24 points per game, that's 19th defensively. So you hit a couple green lights here, go from 24th to 19th. And then you're asking Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, and this offense to score 25 plus points a game. Can we be a double-digit win team and make something happen? That's probably your pathway for this Commanders team. Now, we'll continue talking strengths, weaknesses, schedule, predictions here in just a second. I do want to talk some special teams real quick. They didn't really do much here. Honestly, they didn't really do anything. They cut Matt Gay last year. Jake Moody came in. That's technically your change, just because it happened in the middle of the season last year. But yeah, really not a whole lot of personnel changes to the special teams. But the formula projection for the Commanders has some questions on them, though their PFF and DVOA team grades were excellent last year. So you talk about like team culture and Dan Quinn getting these guys to cover kicks and value special teams and attention to detail. At least that was there last year. But I go off of the PFF grades for kicker and punter. And they rank 31st at kicker with Jake Moody, of all people, is right now their starting kicker in a competition with an undrafted rookie in Drew Stevens. So I guess we'll see if Drew Stevens can win that job. But yeah, Jake Mooney's been extremely frustrating as an overdraft by the Niners, obviously. Tress Way, who I think is a fan favorite, has actually graded out putrid for at least per PFF. And, if you think he's great, that's fine. I am just going off of the PFF grading system for these guys. And Jake Moody has been the worst punter in the league over the last 2 years. So your kicking game has some pretty major questions. I think the returners are fine. Jalen Lane doing more of the kick returning, Luke McCaffrey doing the punt returning. I think that's fine. Those guys have shown some good stuff there. So there's reasons between the coverage unit, the returners, that this can be a decent special teams, but the kicker punter situation is definitely questionable. So they came out as my 28th ranked special teams for the Commanders. But let's recap some things here before we look at the schedule and my final prediction for Washington. And as far as strengths are concerned, the Commanders do have some really important core strengths that they can hang their hat on, even if we don't know exactly where Jaden Daniels is going to land. And he does show up as a wild card because there is a chance that he plays less than, say, I have him ranked, and maybe quarterback is more of a non-strength, for example. But I think we still have enough of a pedigree there with that rookie season, getting back healthy this year and still not playing bad last year necessarily, that we can say quarterback should be a strength for the Commanders until proven otherwise. And then the pass protection is awesome here. So like that's a good foundation to start to build things around. But they do have some pretty glaring weaknesses as well. I think the ancillary pass catchers, even if the overall weaponry did rank like in okay territory, was it 24th to 27th? That's almost exclusively Terry McLaurin, who in my eyes is still a borderline top 10 wide receiver. At 31 years old, that's almost exclusively him doing the heavy lifting. And even then, it's like you want other pieces. So weaponry as a whole, maybe not a weakness because of Terry McLaurin, but the risk of a 31-year-old coming off an injury with really no one else to trust, it's very dangerous territory. And like I said, I think they really struck out. It's not like they weren't trying to improve that group this offseason. It just didn't work out for them. And then the secondary. Right now, the secondary is a weakness. It does show up, the secondary, with the wild cards. If those young corners look good, some of those things we talked about, it could be a non-weakness for the Commanders and just be okay. I don't see that secondary being a strength for the Commanders this year. That'd be a pretty big surprise, but kind of like Minnesota, it hasn't looked great on paper, but that defensive scheme has made it work with the blitzing and getting creative on the back end. Just give you enough. Give us a Byron Murphy and a Josh Metellus and a Cam Bynum. Like, you know, those are solid players that have been enough for Minnesota. That's the dream here. And then some of the other wild cards, honestly, like one of the biggest, if not the biggest, is both coordinators, both David Blough and Daronte Jones are going to have a big sway in how much success this team has this year. It's a big narrative for this team this year. I did ultimately put the D-line down as a wild card just because there is that thin margin that we talked about where if Owe really did figure something out with the Chargers last year, if Dorrance Armstrong can get back healthy and be 100% and maybe Jerjon Newton takes a step, okay, I don't know the D-line's necessarily still going to be like a strength at that point, but you're getting closer to it, right? Right now it's closer to a weakness, but borderline, like it's an okay D-line. Can we be a decent to okay? That's kind of the thin margin for that as a wild card. More just a wild card because there's a decent amount of unknowns with that defensive line right now. And then linebacker is in there strictly from an upside perspective. Right now, I can't quite put linebacker in there as a strength, but we raved about the upside of that group, right? Like how quickly does that hit with that duo? Can that be one of the best linebacker rooms in the league as early as this season? Then you have a strength on defense, honestly. So there's your Venn diagram for the Commanders. Let's take a look at their schedule and ultimately how many wins I'm predicting for Washington this year. And unfortunately, this is rough. Probably the hardest schedule we've looked at so far as I can remember. I mean, you start at Philly, at Dallas. Those are your two hardest division games. Like, here you go. Get ready. Like, new staff, people coming back from injuries, like, young team with a lot of new moving pieces. Here you go. Good luck. Maybe your two most important games of the year. Boom, boom. Have fun. Okay. Well, at least we get some time off after that, right? Nope. Super Bowl champs are coming to town. Like, Jesus Christ. Can we catch a break? So that's a tough start. And then, okay, well, we at least have another home game, right? Against an inferior competition. Nope. You're going to London against the Colts, who are a solid team. Winnable game. Then it's like, all right, international game. We get a bye week, right? We can finally catch our breath and lock in for the easy part of our. Nope, you don't get a bye week. You get to play the Giants, but you're playing right after going to London, and then okay, we're exhausted. We finally get our bye week, right? Or at least an easy opponent. Nope, you're going across the entire country to play the fucking Niners. Like, Jesus, man, what were the schedule makers cooking? These poor Commanders. And it's not done there. You do get your bye week finally after just a brutal schedule, like a travel schedule there. You're flying over the entire globe there. You do get your bye week, but then you have to host the Eagles and the Rams. You go to the Giants, you host the Bengals. That's not an easy month. Then things finally lighten up for the last third of the year. You got at Arizona, at Tennessee, host the Texans, Atlanta, at Minnesota, at Jacksonville, you host Dallas. I think like surviving the first half of the year, just go 3-5 in those first 9 weeks. That's going to be tough to do for Washington. But if you can do that, I think things can come together and maybe by the end of the year you can go on a run. But it's going to be a lot for this team to overcome. So with that schedule, my prediction came in a little bit lower than I wanted to on the Commanders. Six wins, an easier schedule. I would say 7, maybe even 8. But my prediction was 6 wins, which is below their over-under of 7.5. I think their floor is like, that's pretty close to their floor. My prediction here is dangerously close to what I have as their floor. I do think their ceiling is 10 wins with the upside with the offense. Just get a decent enough defense, win some close games, get that Jaden Daniels clutch factor. I don't think like the division is out of reach. I don't think like a playoff season is out of reach. I do see, a world where things can go right for this Commanders team. We're in that range now in these deep dives where, yeah, these teams might not rank as high as the fans want to see them, but with how tightly knit some of these NFL teams are, if 14 teams make the playoffs, it doesn't take much for the Commanders to creep up back into that range where they want to be. And I did find it interesting that their Super Bowl odds are actually 18th to 19th, and I think that shows a lot of respect to Jaden Daniels. The bettors kind of saying like, well, this team probably won't make it, but if they do, that guy can be special. And the best case scenario with Jaden Daniels can be a Super Bowl contender. This year's a stretch, but I get why those odds are a little bit higher than maybe their over-under and some of the other like more floor-based gambling markets would have. But let's have some fun and finish with my Commanders Team Superlative Award winners. So for team MVP, and I don't select quarterbacks for this because that's obvious, I did say Terry McLaurin. I do predict a really good age 31 season for Terry McLaurin. I don't know how much he's going to have after this year, so it's important that these other guys start to fill in. But I think we get a big hoorah from Terry, kind of carrying this group. I'm going to be targeting him a lot in my fantasy leagues, and that might be a little bit of a teaser for our fantasy MVP at the end of this. But for biggest wild card, and again, non-quarterback, because I think Jaden Daniels with his upside would be a great option for this. But that's most teams and their quarterbacks. That's why I don't pick quarterbacks for biggest wild card. I actually said David Blough. I think with how unproven he is as a coordinator, like this could go in so many different directions. We've seen bad, inexperienced coordinators derail teams' seasons. And we've seen guys like break through and really surprise and show the value of that great play caller. So I actually said David Blough as the biggest wild card. Just the range of outcomes for him is incredibly vast. Breakout offense. This is not going to be the popular pick here, but I said, wait for it, Nick Allegretti, baby. Big Ten lineman getting better in year 6 or whatever, moving into center. I kind of like it, man. I'm kind of a believer that he can at least settle in as like a decent starter, maybe get a nice contract here, and just kind of surprise as a solid piece for this O-line. Maybe overly optimistic for a guy that has a chance at losing his job to a 6th round center, but screw it. We're going with Nick Allegretti. Breakout defense. I think you guys can guess this. It's Leo Chenal. His first year as a full-time starter. My favorite free agent signing of this offseason. Someone that I compared to Demario Davis as a draft prospect. I think the world of Leo Chenal, and I cannot wait to watch him and watch him next to Sonny Styles here in a defense that I think has so many creative ways to use a guy like this. I did change, actually, the best rookie. I changed this because especially as we get towards, we're starting to get into better teams that don't have a lot of high draft picks. I feel like this is going to be, sticking with best rookie, I feel like is a little more obvious. I was like, looking at this, I was like, well, of course I have to pick Sonny Styles. Like, that's going to be a lot of teams moving forward where it's just their first round pick, and that's not as exciting. So I'm changing this award to Unsung Hero. Something I've even asked my guests, but that underrated player that doesn't get enough praise, but is actually critical for what the team's going to do. And I didn't spend enough time talking about John Bates. who is one of the better run blocking tight ends in the NFL. He was actually my pro comp for Jackson Hawes, who at least NFL nerds know how much Jackson Hawes got covered last year for his run blocking. John Bates is absolutely a factor for this team's run game, for heavy personnel, for a team that doesn't have a lot of wide receivers but has depth at tight end. His ability to stick his hand next to the tackle and do the dirty work is really important. Not going to catch a lot of passes here, but a really good football player that deserves some love. Then we have the fantasy MVP. Like I said, Terry McLaurin is my pick here, but he's going as wide receiver 23. I mean, he was a top 10 wide receiver in 2024 in a similar infrastructure with Jaden Daniels. I think he'll outperform 23. I don't know if he'll crack top 10. He might. But I'd be pretty surprised if Terry McLaurin isn't a top 15 fantasy wide receiver. So if we're hunting value in your fantasy leagues, I'm absolutely going to be targeting Terry McLaurin, who's going somewhere around 5th to 6th round. I would take him in the 4th, like late 4th. Yeah, absolutely. So he's my pick there. But that's going to do it. Thank you so much for watching. Definitely let me know in the comments down below if there's Commanders fans, if there's anything that you think I missed. Let me know. Little details, stuff that can slip under the cracks as I cover all 32 teams here on this channel. Just little news and notes. Love to see the fans kind of providing some of that feedback. Is always one of my favorite parts of this series, is just learning more and more and more little stuff about these teams. So if there's anything, let me know. And let me know who you think comes next in this series with the number 22 ranking in this series. We're starting to get up there, man. We are. These teams are getting better and better, which is always fun. Thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Please subscribe so you don't miss the remainder of this series. And until next time, thank you for watching. Cheers.